that her father could enjoy and even look forward to. Let's meet Erin Kemper and her father, Jack.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Erin, how did you do that?
I thought about all the things that my dad likes to watch and put it into a ballet.
Well, we have a special treat for you today because Erin is now going to perform her new ballet. When I pay the bills, I get to make the rules.
We can't afford that. World War II. I miss your mother too, but we're gonna have to do the best without her. Go Redskins!
Bravo! Well done. Boy, I wish you were mine. You know, my two girls are grown up, but you still couldn't pay me to watch one of their a cappella shows. What inspired you to create this amazing ballet?
I'm really inspired by the theme of my dad paying any attention to me at all.
Now, at the end, I hear she just put the game up on the big screen.
I don't know where she gets it.
This is the Onion News Network.
We're still not sure why you'd want to watch, but our video feed is streaming nightly for free at cam.freetalklive.com. Free Talk Live.
What's up, all of our liberty-loving friends? This is another fantastic episode of Liberty at Night with Nate and Charlie on the Free Talk Live Network, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Remember to listen to our daily podcast, Good Morning Liberty, on your favorite podcast app. Before we get to the Supreme Court stuff, we got to do a little bit of election stuff. You know, we had that debate. Well, we didn't have the debate, but those other guys, the old ones, they had that debate. Some polling was conducted immediately afterwards, and some important questions were asked, like, does Biden have mental and cognitive health to serve as president? This is all the registered voters in the poll. Before the debate, 35% say that he does, 27% now, 65% said he doesn't, 72% now say that he does not after the debate. Democratic registered voters, should Biden be running for president, before the debate, they had 64%. Now they have 54%. And should not, these are Democratic registered voters, they have 36% before the debate, 46% say that he should not be running for president. But question now to Democratic registered voters, should he be the nominee?
Should he continue?
55% say that he should continue, and 45% say that he should step aside.
Looks like the party split.
So, but the Democratic choice here right now is that he should continue running, although I doubt he can run.
How did his family meeting go yesterday?
They had a family meeting. They had a meeting at Camp David, I guess, is where they went. And Biden talked to his closest advisors, which is his son, Hunter, which is like his closest advisor. And they decided that they are going to keep going.
Yeah.
It's not time to stop. He says, I'm not leaving.
Keep fighting.
That's what he said. Going to keep fighting the good fight. Go ahead, Charlie. Read some of that.
Mr. Biden huddled with his wife, children, and grandchildren at Camp David while he tried to figure out how to tamp down Democratic anxiety. While his relatives are acutely aware of how poorly he did against President Donald Trump, they argued that he could still show the country that he is capable of serving for another 4 years. 4 years!
The last part is kind of funny here and
important.
One
of the strongest voices imploring Mr. Biden to resist pressure to drop out was his son, Hunter Biden, whom the president has long leaned on for advice. He's now leaning on a convicted felon.
To beat a convicted felon.
If anybody knows anything about convicted felons, Dad, listen to me. Okay?
Yeah. So I guess...
Don't believe what your eyes saw and your ears heard.
No.
Pay no attention to what's happening right in front of your face.
Don't do that.
Listen to what we have to say about him day in and day out. Like Jean-Pierre.
That's all you should pay attention to. That's all you should pay attention to. Karine Jean-Pierre?
Yeah.
KJP? As we call her?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess he's staying in. There were reports yesterday. I think Bill O'Reilly was out there tweeting essentially that he was going to be dropping out, and O'Reilly was essentially alluding to the fact that he had some inside sources that they had decided in this meeting that he was going to drop out of the race, and then that never happened. So I guess that was fake news. But yeah, I guess he's going to stay in. Now, if you're a Republican, you should be, and you want Trump to win the election, you should be happy that Biden is staying in the race, because that gives Trump the best chance to win. I happen to think that if they were to swap him out for a Gavin Newsom, he loses, hands down. If they swap him out for Kamala Harris, I think maybe Trump could still win that, but no one in the Democratic Party is dumb enough to put Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. I don't think. So
here's the thing, though. There's a few ballots. I guess there's state rules like Wisconsin, for instance, where they cannot. The last day to change the ballot was Friday.
I saw that there were some that they couldn't change.
And the only way that they can change it is if he dies, which is a possibility. After watching the debate Thursday night, it's possible that that guy could just fall over at any minute. His heart is going to attack and kill him. I don't care what they say about your heart.
He should make sure his food testers are working full time.
Yeah.
You know? So the big news today is what the Supreme Court has been doing. We had already planned about talking about the Supreme Court today because we were going to go through the Chevron case and a couple of the others that happened at the end of the week. And then we were gifted a couple other big rulings today as well. One of them is not getting talked about very much. It was getting talked about for about 5 minutes on Twitter. And then this one came out. But the one before it is a really big deal, and we'll get to that later. It's closely related to the Chevron thing, so we'll talk about that. But the first one, the headline here from CNN is that the Supreme Court says Trump has immunity for official acts, and that is, in fact, what they said. Now, we've been on record a few times saying that we don't think the president should have immunity from prosecution. I'm conflicted on this one because I think the cases against President Trump are political in nature and would not have been brought against anyone else and would not have been brought against him if he hadn't announced that he was running for president. I don't think that they would have ever done it. They didn't really care about prosecuting someone to the fullest extent of the law. They cared about using this against him in an election. But I happen to not think that the president should have immunity because I don't want them to commit any crimes.
Right.
I want their powers to be as limited. I want them to be as scared as humanly possible to ever do anything.
Yeah.
Actually.
Are you surprised, though? Because they upheld police immunity.
Qualified
immunity. So, of course, they're going to uphold or they're going to rule in a favor of officials having some sort of immunity.
Now,
they're acting in an official capacity.
There are some.
But my thing is like, okay, if the president orders like Chicago to be drone bombed,
there is a caveat to that.
Okay,
there is a carve out here.
Okay.
In the ruling, it's not exactly what everyone's been saying. Here's a nice screenshot of what the ruling looked like. Trump versus the United States. This is an important line. They hold that under our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority. And he is entitled to at least presumptive immunity from prosecution for all of his official acts. There is no immunity for unofficial acts. So there is an important...
like grabbing ladies by the P word.
Unofficial.
That's not an official act of the president.
So, in fact, they pointed to in the case that Bill Clinton did not get immunity for some of the things with the ladies because that was unofficial. Didn't have to do with his duties as a president.
He should have had him sign an official document before he did it.
I know, like I hereby order you to do this. Yeah, that kind of thing. But no, there's an important word in here. 2 words, actually. Actually, it's 4 words I'm about to say. Within his constitutional authority. All right. So it does still need to be constitutional within the president's constitutional authorities. It does not mean that if this is an official act, I've decided to level the city of Chicago. Well, does the president have the constitutional authority to do that kind of thing? So there is still a question there. It's not just blanket immunity for every single thing. You can murder as many people as you want, all that kind of thing. But however, I do interpret this to mean that Obama does have immunity for drone bombing American citizens abroad, because I believe under the authorization to use the military force, stuff like that he was acting as commander in chief and was going after terrorists. And that would basically be deemed to be within his constitutional authorities and official acts as president.
Which I find disgusting.
Yes. And is it constitutional or unconstitutional? I think people are entitled to due process. I think that this is going to give him immunity on that kind of thing. All right. But the constitutional part is pretty important. I summed it up on Twitter. The Supreme Court holds that president has absolute immunity for official acts within his constitutional authority, presumptive immunity for acts within the outer perimeter of his authority, which is something they said a lot in the decision, and no immunity for unofficial acts. So inside of this, they went through the case against Trump, the DC case against Trump, and they ruled that one of the things he did, which was pressuring the Department of Justice and the acting attorney general, I think it was Barr, at this time, that pressure, and he actually threatened to fire him basically if he didn't send this letter out to the states, letting them know, that this is a fraudulent election, that was an official act as president, and that he could threaten to fire him, that he's got all the purview over firing these people for whatever reason he wants to fire these people. They then said that him pressuring Vice President Mike Pence was within the outer perimeter of his authority. He was pressuring Mike Pence to on January 6th to not count those ballots, to basically delay that whole thing. And they said that's within the outer perimeter. It's actually within Vice President Mike Pence's authority to count those votes. And they say it's kind of outer perimeter, and that the district court will have to decide if this was an official act for the Pence thing. And then the fake alternate electors scheme, where they tried to get these other alternate/fake electors signed up to come in there and vote for Trump, that has to go to the district court as well to be determined if that was an official act or unofficial act. If it was him acting as in his campaign for president, basically, then that's unofficial. If it was him acting as the president to protect and safeguard American elections, then that's an official act. But the court, they say they kick that back down to the district court to decide whether or not this is official or unofficial. So that's how that particular case
Now I'm sure
is going to be affected.
The left is losing their minds over this.
Oh yeah, a lot. Did you look at? Have you already looked at the slideshow? Is that?
I haven't. No,
because that's 2 times now where you were ready to transition into the next
I've
topic.
been doing this for a while. Yeah, I just kind of
you've called it to the slide 2 times now. Okay.
This is my history. I've just got a lot of experience.
So Nina Turner says, Charlie,
what an absolutely dangerous ruling from the Supreme Court. According to this ruling, a sitting president would be able to commit treason so long as the act is committed in an official capacity.
Is that true?
No.
Yeah, it's not.
No.
Because treason is not constitutional. It would be an illegal act, and that, therefore, he would not have immunity to commit treason. So that's fact check false. Okay. The problem is she's responding to a tweet from someone who kind of gives an overview to make it sound as bad as possible. Now, we can disagree. Charlie and I can disagree and say that presidents should not have immunity and that they should all be afraid to act, that they should just not do anything. In fact, everyone in government should be afraid to leave their houses. Honestly, that's
you should absolutely ponder whether or not there are any consequences to your actions before you make that action.
What?
Yes.
That's crazy.
Yes.
You're crazy.
Now, I have an overarching, I've seen something interesting on this, because a lot of the left is just losing their mind over all of these Supreme Court decisions. And so I have an interesting, not take, but just an interesting conversation around whether or not the Supreme Court has the authority to do what they're doing anyway. So now, of course, the left is calling in, the authority of whether or not courts issue opinions and we can ignore them, or whether they actually have the authority to strike down things. Now,
interesting times we live in.
I know. So I saw this video of a very smart guy, I think, and I enjoy his other stories. But anyway, he brought up Marbury versus Madison and how basically in 1805 that the Supreme Court basically granted themselves this power that they didn't have before. And he basically started saying how the Constitution isn't actually a law and was never a law. It was just an agreed upon thing. And that the Supreme Court was never supposed to rule on whether things are constitutional or not, to which I disagree. And he tries to say the Supreme Court was so insignificant that, the 4 justices met in the basement of the Philadelphia Center or whatever. Well, it's like, so did everyone back in 1800, by the way. Like the White House, I think, was barely built by 1805.
They didn't have like these crazy
didn't have
grand
the
palaces.
Exactly. They didn't have all these official buildings back then. But anyway, I think what people miss, and this thing has been, to me, this part of the Constitution has been the most misinterpreted, is the Supremacy Clause. Mm-hmm. And if you read the Supremacy Clause, it says very specifically that this Constitution, it says this document and the United States law made in pursuance thereof, meaning any United States laws made in pursuance of the Constitution, meaning adhering to the enumerated powers of the Constitution, are supreme law of the land, which established, by the way, the Constitution as the supreme law in any United States, any federal laws that are adherents to the Constitution. That established, and then if you read Article 3, Section 2, that establishes the Supreme Court, the judicial authority to rule on matters which are made federal. And anytime, and this was about Chevron deference, which we're going to get to, but when a citizen challenges a federal agency, that there makes that matter federal, which gives the Supreme Court jurisdiction to rule over it. And so in the overarching thing, as you see the left start to come out against Supreme Court authority, they go, like they always do, they go way too far. Now, we have argued that the Supreme Court has overstepped its bounds many times because they have, and they have ruled on things that either shouldn't be federal or between, or in matters in which the states can ignore their opinion, because it is just an opinion. It still is just an opinion. It's still an opinion. Yes.
They don't have a SWAT team. They can't command the army.
They can't enforce any of them.
Yeah.
No. And you know, I think governors of states and presidents of the United States can ignore them.
And then the people are supposed to...
And the people, exactly.
Enforce the consequences of those actions afterwards.
By voting or whatever. And that's how the separation of powers work. The Supreme Court is really to inform people about the...
Are your leaders enacting and carrying out constitutional laws?
Yes.
Our opinion is no. Now you are supposed to take that information and act on it.
Yes.
They give that opinion.
Yes. So pay attention to that. I wanted to talk about that as an overarching theme. So pay attention to that.
Well, it's interesting now that the left is coming out with that opinion.
Because they're making rulings they don't agree with.
So now all of a sudden, you know, you shouldn't listen. And of course, the court is corrupted. They've been working on that narrative for a while. You're seeing a lot of this right now. We've already talked about this. This is a fake headline here, but this is a general idea. In full compliance with the Supreme Court's ruling, this is a fake headline from the New York Times. To serve his country, President Biden should drone strike Donald Trump. They did not greenlight drone striking American citizens on U.S. soil. Okay.
So you're saying Trump should stay in the country?
They should stay in the country as long as someone else is the president. Okay. Yeah. We do still have what's that, posse comitatus or whatever it is. The U.S. military is not supposed to conduct those operations within the U.S. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Lincoln Project, actually go through here.
All right. The Supreme Court is giving America a king for its birthday this year. Nancy Pelosi says today the Supreme Court has gone rogue with its decision, violating the foundational American principle that no one is above the law. That's in the Constitution. It says no one's above the law. The former president's claim to total presidential immunity is an insult to the vision of our founders who declared independence from a king. And then Will Stancil said, so is there any reason Biden couldn't just drone strike Trump and end this?
The problem is a lot of these people have not read the actual ruling. I'm pretty sure that following that drone strike, if it were to make it to the Supreme Court, they would deem that to be unconstitutional. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. I know there's no river that doesn't contain a bend or whatever,
It'd
but
be in direct violation of the Fifth Amendment.
I'm pretty sure that's the case. There's a little bit more. By the way, I did not go and seek these out. This was just my feed. And so I just took some screenshots, and this was like every tweet afterwards.
From Mehdi Hassan, the truth speaker of all truth tellers, he said, so the Supreme Court just okayed Biden, hypothetically, assassinating Donald Trump. Am I following their legal reasoning correctly? The answer is no. Mehdi Hassan, you're not. Michael Beschloss said, thanks to the Supreme Court today, presidents in future will have access to far more unaccountable power than they ever have had in American history.
That might be true. Yeah, that could be.
It's possible. Yeah.
Accidental true in there and sandwiched in between.
Aaron Rupar said, so if Joe Biden declared today that November's election is canceled and ordered the military to keep him in power, should that be an official act?
That's a more interesting question than the other ones, honestly. But they did still say that it's got to be within his constitutional authority, his constitutional powers for that to happen. But I don't know. We'll have to let the courts adjudicate that one.
Which
we'll see.
Which, for people to understand, the Constitution is an enumerated list of powers. This means like you can only do these things. Mm-hmm. Now, I would argue that Obama could still be held accountable under jurisprudence, even because the fact that the Authorization Act or whatever isn't
AUMF
isn't in compliance with the Constitution, and therefore his duties that he's acting out underneath this congressional act are still unconstitutional.
Yeah.
So therefore immunity doesn't apply.
I believe they addressed something like that in the ruling. I'm trying to remember because I read 4 separate Supreme Court opinions, but I think they talked about retroactively deciding that something was unconstitutional. I believe they covered some of that. And when I read it, it gave me the impression that Obama did in fact have immunity on this, but I can't quote any specific passages right now. There is this rule for posse comitatus, carrying out actual apprehension, searches, questioning, and arrests using force or physical violence, brandishing or using weapons, except in self-defense and defense of other military personnel or defense of non-military persons, including civilian law enforcement personnel. Those are things that the U.S. military can't do on soil. I think it's pretty clear, allegedly, that the U.S. president can't order the U.S. military to conduct these operations. But we do still have other organizations that conduct operations on U.S. soil, like, I don't know, the FBI or whoever it is.
ATF.
And we're supposed to act like the CIA doesn't do anything in the U.S. still, even though everyone knows that that's not true. Yeah. I mean, come on. But anyhow, we can get to a couple of the other cases. There was another case on Friday pertaining to January 6th. There was one interesting point here, which is that Ketanji Brown Jackson actually was with the conservative justices on this one, which is something I didn't see anyone on the left talking about, because of course this was a corrupt Supreme Court that was trying to help an insurrectionist president get out of trouble by knocking down one of these January 6 charges. But Jackson also sided with them when it came to the J6 charge. This had to do with obstructing an official proceeding, and a bunch of people got charged with that. And what they essentially found was that it's not just anyone who obstructs an official proceeding. Like, you go there and you cause a stir and you're preventing an official proceeding from happening. Okay. So like, now this is on state level, so it's not really the same thing, but you know, when that dude was causing all that fuss here in Tennessee, in the state capitol, can't remember his name right now. I don't remember
Jamal,
what it was.
Something like that.
There was a J.
Yeah.
It was a J word, I'm pretty sure.
Jerome.
So I don't think it was either one of those, but maybe we'll end up having to look that up. I'm not entirely sure. Now, they were obstructing an official proceeding, and everyone on the right was like, oh, they're obstructing an official proceeding. This is an insurrection, that kind of thing. What they officially ruled was that this specific section pertains to alter, destroying, mutilating, concealing a record, a document, another object that to prevent that object from being used in this official proceeding, that those things have to be tied together, and it's not just, say, activists that are protesting and stuff like that. And so
it was Justin Jones and Justin Pearson.
I knew that there are a lot of J's involved. A lot of J's involved with that thing. We got more coming right up on Liberty at Night on the Free Talk Live Network.
Why did you move to the Shire?
I moved here to the Shire because there's other people around who take liberty just as seriously as I do.
I moved to the Shire because I saw videos of people challenging authority and thought that I could get support myself. It called to me, like, do this, right now.
I wanted to be around people like me who got it, and once I got here, I knew there was nowhere else that I wanted to be.
I've always wanted to change the world, so I moved to the Shire to join people who were actually working towards doing the same thing.
The people here are awesome, loving, and positive. It was for the adventure and for the feeling of something important is happening here. And I just wanted to come to sort of be part of that.
Visit ShireSociety.com to read and sign the Shire Society Declaration and learn the reasons why, if you love liberty, you should immigrate to the Shire. Plus, connect with others via the forum at ShireSociety.com. That's ShireSociety.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Kate Fisher. Donald Trump's sentencing has been postponed following the United States Supreme Court's controversial decision to provide criminal immunity for U.S. presidents. He was due to appear in court in New York next Thursday, having been convicted for falsifying business records, a guilty verdict that Trump says he'll appeal. He was due to appear in court in New York next Thursday, having been convicted for falsifying business records, a guilty verdict that Trump says he'll appeal. But the judge has confirmed the sentencing is officially delayed until mid-September, after Trump argued his conviction should be overturned amid Monday's landmark Supreme Court ruling, as Benji Hire explains.
It's been quite the 24 hours for Donald Trump, the first current or former US president to be criminally convicted, now running for the White House again. He asked for his sentencing to be adjourned on the basis that the Supreme Court granted him immunity from prosecution for official actions he took while in office. It's not clear whether his crime in this case, concealing a payment to buy the silence of a porn star to cover up an affair in the final days of the 2016 election campaign, counts as an official act. But prosecutors agreed to his request, and that means the sentencing, whilst this is deliberated, is rescheduled until September 18th.
Texas Congressman Lloyd Doggett from the state's liberal capital, Austin, has become the first House Democrat to call on President Joe Biden to drop out of the presidential race, following his dismal performance during last week's debate. Tony Waterman has more from Austin.
In a statement, Doggett said that while Biden had done much for America, too much was at stake to risk a Trump victory, saying he's hopeful the president will make the painful and difficult decision to withdraw from the race. Doggett is the first sitting Democrat to publicly call on Biden to step aside, vocalizing what some Democrats have been talking about privately.
The United Nations says it's concerned by new Israeli military evacuation orders from Khan Yunis in Gaza. An estimated 250,000 people are set to be impacted. Meanwhile, the Security Council received an update on the humanitarian situation, with UN officials calling on Israel to find solutions to enable the safe delivery of aid in the enclave. Jody Jacobs reports from the United Nations headquarters in New York.
The United Nations says it is still not able to deliver aid in quantities required. Sigrid Kaag, the humanitarian and reconstruction coordinator for Gaza, telling the United Nations Security Council that the war has not only created a humanitarian crisis, it has unleashed a maelstrom of human misery.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
You can help spread the ideas of liberty with our Patreon for just $5 per month at amps.freetalklive.com.
We just had one of the, for libertarians, for small government people, we just have one of the whitest of white pill rulings that we've ever seen in our entire lives.
Amen.
Okay, I don't know any better way to make it sound than that. It was one of the best things that we've ever seen happen at the Supreme Court level. And I hope they do get a SWAT team and enforce this one. Make sure that everyone pays attention to this ruling. Okay, the Chevron doctrine, so-called, is dead, apparently. Now, everyone has heard the basic rundown of what this was. It essentially gave the agencies a leg up where the courts, if someone had an issue and it would go to the court, the agencies had a leg up. That the agencies had experts and that the courts would defer to their expertise, and they essentially had a head start in the court case because they were the agency. And so it was more likely to go in their favor.
Yeah. So this was a case, Chevron, back in, I believe it was versus the EPA, back in 84, I think.
I don't remember this.
82, 84. 84, okay, yeah. So back in 84, essentially what the court ruled in that case was that when Congress makes laws with
ambiguity,
with ambiguity, when it's not real clear what Congress was saying. Like basically like don't poison the drinking water. That, you know, that it was what the courts ruled then is that the agencies were left and could interpret that law and decide administratively what that meant and what the fines would be and all of that. They deferred that to the agencies. Now, I understand that to some degree. I do. But the other degree is that type of ambiguity and unclearness can lead to an exorbitant abuse of power, which we have seen happen since this time.
Now I know you said that you understand that reasoning, and I get it. I do too. If we accept the fact that we should have a government that should stick its nose into every single one of these things in the first place. Sure, if your government is going to be intimately involved in healthcare and controlling everything with the environment or gun rights or whatever, sure, you defer to experts in these fields and they can write the specific statutes. But the answer is they shouldn't be involved in these things in the first place. That's why there was no real mechanism for doing this, because they shouldn't do it. That's why this ended up getting overturned. And people are like, well, how are we going to do this?
Yeah.
You're not. They're still going to find a way to do it.
And the people, what's interesting to me, and people making the argument that a lot of people on the left are making the argument about the FDA. And it's like, do you realize nearly 1/3 of drugs that the FDA approves end up getting recalled? Okay. And do you realize that companies either pay the FDA members or they promise the FDA members that when they leave the FDA, they're going to have a lucrative board seat at their company, making millions of dollars. Just, get this through. We watched the whole documentary on the whole opiate epidemic and how they got the FDA to sign off on Oxycontin, which at first the guy was very hesitant to sign off on it. And in the documentary, they talk about how they took him to a hotel conference room.
No telling what happened.
They wouldn't let anybody in there. And then all of a sudden, that day or the next day, it was approved. I mean, what a miracle.
They took him to a hotel. They had him do compromising things in a hotel that was bugged and had cameras all over it. And then they showed it to him. And then they told him to go back and approve the drug. I'm just going to go ahead and throw that theory out there. Is what happened. Okay, a major Supreme Court ruling Friday that shifted power. Now, this is an article from CNN that's meant to tell you how terrible this was.
Yep.
I love it. It sounds so good. That's the best way to read this, is from people who are trying to tell you how terrible this whole thing is. As a major Supreme Court ruling Friday that shifted power from the executive branch to the judiciary stands to transform how the federal government works. By overturning a 1984 precedent, the court's conservative majority has made countless regulations vulnerable to legal challenge.
Oh, no.
The types of executive branch moves that the ruling jeopardizes include a plan to put Wi-Fi on school buses. I don't know about you, that was one of the hardest parts about going to school. We didn't even have education for children when we were growing up because there wasn't any Wi-Fi on the school buses. I don't know how kids made it. A new ban on non-compete clauses, healthcare coverage rules being implemented through Obamacare, and the latest plan to forgive student loan debt. A Supreme Court ruling could boost efforts by conservatives who have taken aim at the Biden Environmental Protection Agency's rules limiting planet-warming pollution from vehicles, oil and gas wells and pipelines, and power plants. The so-called Chevron doctrine told courts to defer to an agency's interpretation. We know that. Quote, essentially, any time where an agency has a dispute with either an individual or some other entity, sometimes even the federal government versus the state government, Chevron deference would come up. I said a legal fellow at the Cato Institute. The ruling has injected legal uncertainty into regulations of all types, including those on technology, labor, the environment, and healthcare. There are so many highly complex scientific policy decisions that it would be nearly impossible for Congress to draft legislation with enough detail to account for every regulatory scenario. Legal scholars argue.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
That's a good thing.
That means that we should take this on a case-by-case basis.
Yes. And when they write a law...
Now, do you know the case that was brought to the Supreme Court?
Fishery thing, yeah.
But do you know why? Do you know why?
Because they were charging them $700 a day for them to keep an eye on them fishing. Yeah,
a day,
just randomly. Yeah.
Now we all talking about abuse of power. This is absolutely insane. It was the U.S. Wildlife Fish Service? Whatever.
I don't remember what it was.
I think it was the U.S.
Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They essentially they were forcing this business to pay them $700 a day to keep watch on their fishing, basically. And so it's like, that is so outrageous and egregious. And like they, under Chevron, they can get away with it. They can get away with that kind of garbage.
Well, apparently not. Not with this
Not
court.
anymore.
Not with this
Not
court.
anymore.
This radical court. Roberts said the new opinion should not be used to upend previous cases upholding regulations, absent a special justification. For now, opponents of regulations are constrained by a 6-year statute of limitations for challenging executive branch actions under the relevant law. But the Supreme Court has yet to decide a case heard this term that might gut that limitation. That decision is expected Monday. That is the other really big case that no one is talking about. They talked about for 5 minutes. The Supreme Court gutted that, and there is no longer a 6-year statute of limitations on any of these regulations.
Amen.
So at first, they were still freaking out about it, but there was a 6-year statute of limitations from the time that the regulation came into effect. What they essentially ruled in this other case, I guess we'll jump to it here for a second, was that, well, this business started in 2018. Therefore, there's no way that they could have been harmed within the 6-year statute of limitations from this 2011, whatever it is. Regulation, yeah. But they're within 6 years of the time that they started being harmed from the regulation. That means that anyone that started the business within the last 6 years would be able to challenge any of the regulations. This is, in fact, as big or bigger than the Chevron ruling. People were talking about it a lot until the Trump immunity, the presidential immunity decision came out, and then it got pushed back.
You think SCOTUS released those at the same time?
So they released. They might have. Yeah, they might have buried it. So here's some of the examples of what could happen. Go ahead, Charlie, with this one.
All right. Consumer safeguards. Agencies charged with consumer protection, such as the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Federal Trade Commission, often faced opposition from financial service firms and other private sector companies, which may claim that the new rules constrain their ability to compete or cost them too much. That's true. Yes. Think of issues like what shows up on your credit report, what fees banks and other consumer service providers can charge, how lenders make credit decisions, and rules governing the protection of consumers from scams and fraud. Lawsuits that block those regulations could be costly for consumers, advocates say.
That's one people are upset about, and that's one where you hear all these words in here, and you're like, well, I don't like those fees, and I'm not a fan of that stupid thing that's on my credit report.
The bank's not required to give you any money.
Yeah. It's not your money. You're asking someone else for money that you don't have a right to. It's their money, not yours. And they can set up whatever terms they want for giving you money.
It's not even their money. They're letting you borrow other people's money. Yeah. And they want to make sure you can pay it back.
So there's one thing here. Let's see. Propose.
And if you can't, it's most likely your fault.
More than likely. Now, if you wanted to fix some of these things, like fees and stuff like that, the answer is more competition. The more competition you have in these industries, then the lower fees you're going to have, the better deals for all the consumers you're going to have. But these agencies come in and they actually end up limiting competition because they make it so difficult to go through all the other regulations. Competition is the answer to all those things that we just listed off that you don't like. Proposed employee rules and employee rights may be more constrained. Overtime pay, benefits, workplace retirement plans, the minimum wage, independent contractors, and employee rights to unionize are just some of the critical workplace issues for which, sorry, I got to adjust my pants real quick here. Workplace issues for which guardrails set by agencies charged with enforcing workplace laws may be contested more vociferously than they already are now. The decision may immediately affect a hot button rule issued this year by the FTC banning non-compete clauses in employer contracts, a regulation the agency says could benefit 20% of U.S. workers. When it comes to regulatory agencies like the Department of Labor, the National Labor Relations Board, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they will no longer be given an automatic advantage when a case is brought challenging how they chose to interpret a law. Remember, none of these things mean that courts are just going to strike down every one of these regulations.
Right.
All it means is that the agencies don't have a leg up purely based on the fact that they're an agency, which is what they've been given. Okay, they were supposed to defer to them. It was essentially the people that were harmed that had the burden of proof, and the agency was the one that had the right to do this, and they had the burden of proof to prove that there was enough harm to overturn it.
And what's more amazing about this is that what people aren't thinking of is that these regulations change depending on who the president is. All right, so Donald Trump's ATF agency can interpret a law to mean one thing,
banning bump stocks.
Yes, and then Biden's ATF agency could interpret the law to mean something else,
banning guns.
Yes. And so you're always going to have this like flip flop, and it's okay, this ambiguous law, we can just interpret it however we want.
But it's the same law.
Yes, the same law. And that, to me, that provides such a confusion for not only companies but regular citizens on what they can or can't do depending on who the president is.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. And I think by the court striking this down is a good thing, because now we can take these by a case basis, and there can actually be rulings, and they can send it back to Congress to say, hey, this isn't specific enough. You're not doing your job. You need to do your job and actually direct these agencies on how they're supposed to interpret this.
What's great about this is that now when there's a new rule, a new law, Congress has to take into account whether or not there's any way that a judge is going to say that this is causing some kind of undue burden or someone, or that's not constitutional or something like that. Now, they already need to pay attention to that anyway, and they might not care. The agencies also have to pay attention to this now. Like, when we make these rules, we no longer get the benefit of the doubt with the court system. So now, are they going to be able to find a judge that's going to show that this is not constitutional, causing some kind of undue burden on someone? And they have to at least consider that when they're writing these rules. It's a good thing. Doesn't mean that they're all going to get overturned or whatever, but it gives you a little bit more of a shot. So that's a good thing. Let's see. How about consumer healthcare protections? One more thing here. Go ahead, Chuck.
The FDA and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, through its Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the problem is there's too many agencies. Yeah. We have to list all these off. I mean, it's a lot. They rely heavily on the flexibility that the Chevron deference provides to manage a highly detailed and sometimes unavoidably complex regulatory process, which means they shouldn't be in there in the first place.
Yeah. They're like, oh, this is going to make it impossible for us to regulate all these things. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't regulate it. On Medicaid alone, the law is what one federal judge famously described as almost unintelligible to the uninitiated. Yes. It's too much. It's ridiculous. I've spent my whole career, basically, in companies that shouldn't exist because they're formed due to regulatory garbage that healthcare companies have to comply with, which is what makes healthcare so expensive. Yeah. One of the reasons. The laws created to allow these health agencies the authority to regulate the country's complex health sector were written in a purposely ambiguous way, legal scholars say. I have trouble saying that word.
Ambiguity.
The ambiguity was necessary to give the agencies the flexibility to use their technical and scientific expertise to make the countless real-world policy decisions that make up the regulatory foundation of programs that directly affect the health of nearly every American. Now, that would be nice if we knew that the heads of these departments were always the experts.
Oh, yeah.
But as it turns out, as we saw during COVID with Fauci and all these other supposed experts, they're able to make rules and regulations and laws basically without representation from the people because they're appointed by bureaucrats, and they're able to make decisions that affect your lives that are not necessarily based in science and can have real harmful effects on people. And so it would be nice if we could trust the angels of society to run these departments.
And Human Services.
Okay. Sorry, I was just trying to get that ready for you because you led right into something that I was going to play today, but decided not to.
Yeah, but now you are, because I know how this works.
I'm going to now. This says a new CDC director explaining how the science works. This had to do with COVID restrictions. Thanks to Spike Cohen for posting this out. Spike had a really big post over the weekend retweeted by Elon Musk. I got ton of views on it. Having to do with Chevron.
So I would call, probably the person I called most was the Secretary of Health and Human Services in Massachusetts. She worked for a Republican governor just to, but you know, when she was like, "Are you going to let them have professional football?" And I was like, "Nope." And she's like, "Okay, neither are we." You know, it was like conversations like that. So, or I'd be like, "So when are you going to think about lightening up a mess?" They're like, "Next Monday." I'm like, "Okay, next Monday." So I would call probably the person I call.
Anyway, that had to do with your conversation about the experts.
Yeah, those are the experts,
making
man.
These expert decisions.
Yeah. Hey, man, are you gonna let people drive their cars? No, we're not. Oh, we're not either. Yeah.
Great idea. Tuesday, Tuesday, us too. Yeah, we're gonna do Tuesday.
Was there any science discussed in those conversations? Hey, does the data indicate? Like, no, we don't know what the data is. Oh, okay, so we can't make a decision yet. That would be a real conversation.
Do you know what a woman is? Okay, no, we don't know what a woman is either.
Yeah.
All right. The multitude of Health and Human Services Department regulations that govern the Affordable Care Act exchanges, Medicaid, Medicare, insurance coverage, and more could now be more easily challenged in court. Several regulations, including those involving the Affordable Care Act's federal premium tax credits, annual out-of-pocket limits, the adequacy of in-network doctor options, and preventative health services at no cost to patients.
Except there is a cost.
Does anyone know how much health insurance went up after Obamacare? And how many people got screwed out of their doctors? And how terrible the out-of-pocket costs went afterwards? Those are all expenses for people involving this law. That cost the patients money. We used to have what was called a Cadillac health insurance plan. That's what they called it. Mm-hmm. Those are illegal now.
Yeah.
But we used to pay.
Or sorry for the radio, but it was called an in case shit happens.
No, the Cadillac plan covered everything and it was cheap as hell. It's where businesses would offer these extravagant health insurance plans for their employees. Those became illegal because they were too good compared to the other ones that Obamacare wanted to pay for.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to pay for the Cadillac plans. And so you couldn't do those anymore. And so our out-of-pocket was super low, deductible super low. Our freaking monthly, we paid like $50 a month for this insurance. She works for a healthcare company, so that helps a little bit. And then, no more. That was gone afterwards. So it costs a lot more, and we got a lot crappier coverage. I was trying to think of another word, but decided not to.
I mean, even with me, I think I went from paying like $100 a month in insurance for me and my son. I think I pay around $600 a month now. And it's still
no cost to you.
Yeah. No cost to me.
No cost.
Yeah.
In addition, challengers could have more chances of success in lawsuits against HHS regulations issued by the Biden administration that ban healthcare providers and insurers from discriminating based on gender identity and sexual orientation, and that interpret the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, known as HIPAA, as prohibiting the disclosure of information on reproductive health care, including abortions, said this dude. Global thing.
Yep.
Said that guy.
Well, but here's the thing. You could still challenge those things in court, and then the agency or whoever can to offer up a defense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you could say, well, hey, we need to protect this, or we need that, whatever. And then that can be adjudicated.
Yeah.
Right? They just don't get to blanket say, well, we're going to provide these things at no cost to the patient. It's
they just don't get the benefit of the doubt, the head start with the legal system. They can still go to court over this.
And I got to go.
Yeah, you got 2 minutes left.
You guys enjoyed Nate's outro.
Yeah, I'll finish this up with the outro.
Love you, bye.
Okay, let me take you off of there real quick. Other programs that could be in jeopardy include the FDA's fast track approval process. With which the agency has sole discretion over which drugs or devices qualify for expedited approval.
Which companies give them the most kickbacks?
Exactly. Maybe some other companies could get expedited approval, fast track approval process, not just the ones that you want to force everyone to take their vaccine. Some scholars say the FDA approval process as a whole could also be undermined by Chevron's reversal. Drugs and devices are approved by the FDA based on evidence that companies submit from what the law requires adequate and well-controlled investigations. However, the definition of such an investigation is left up to the FDA's interpretation. Well, it'd be I mean, just be kind of terrible if we stop this whole 10-year approval process that the FDA makes everyone go through, unless you're Pfizer or Moderna. That would just be awful. Now, we want safe drugs to come out, which is why we should get rid of the FDA in the first place. We've got plenty of other conversations on that. And just to... Oh, we also had net neutrality. They're worried about net neutrality. As you guys know, we had net neutrality for a year when Obama was in office. Trump got rid of it, and all of a sudden we didn't have the internet anymore. The internet got measurably worse while Trump was in office, of course. And then we just got net neutrality back like a month ago, and all of a sudden the internet is working just fine again. Something like that is how the story goes online. The end of Chevron could complicate the U.S. government's efforts to regulate data brokers, social media platforms, generative artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, and more as agencies scramble to interpret their congressional mandates to fit those new challenges. What, they're going to have to scramble to interpret their congressional mandates? I feel so bad for these people at these agencies. Man, shifting regulatory power from agencies to the courts gives well-resourced companies with armies of lawyers even more power to fend off regulations they view as harmful. This is one that I've seen a lot of people talking about. That now these companies are going to come in and they're going to be pushing these cases up into the court system. Now, the court system is still going to adjudicate that, and they're still going to decide whether or not this is within the agency's authority. So if a company decides to pay to send this all the way up to the courts, you let the courts decide. I don't see what's wrong with that. Okay, people like Robert Reich are saying, it's important to see the fall of the Chevron doctrine for what it is, a power grab by corporate interests, allowing them to shop for judges who will strip agencies of their power to protect the public. What happened to the belief that SCOTUS had no role in legislating? That last part is especially funny, considering the fact that all they're saying is actually that an unelected group of bureaucrats in these agencies should not just be able to interpret and enforce and create many of these laws. It's kind of a ridiculous point for him to make. But also the other point is that this is a power grab by corporate interests. No doubt the corporations are going to find specific cases in specific jurisdictions and try to push this up to those courts. You guys think corporations are not controlling any of these agencies right now? I mean, we're supposed to believe that these are just these benevolent agencies trying to keep you safe, the consumer, the financial, the protection, the bureau, those kind of people that are just trying to keep you safe. You think no corporations are paying any of those people in the agencies? Then they leave the agency when they get done approving something and go work at the corporations. We're supposed to act like this doesn't already happen? The actual answer here is to take the power away from those agencies and for the government in general to make less of these laws that are left to interpretation by these agencies. Less ambiguity, meaning they're going to have to put more specific details in the laws. You know what's going to happen then? It's going to get harder for them to pass those laws. And that's a good thing. Coming right up, we got a whole lot more stuff, including Dumb Bleep of the Week, everyone's favorite segment on Liberty at Night on the Free Talk Live Network.
So the protection of life, liberty, and property is what the Free State Project is all about. But it's an effort to move 20,000 people who understand.
It's about demonstrating to the entire country
that, yeah, we can have a free market, a truly free market.
Making it just a freer, great place to live.
It's the world's largest voluntarist libertarian community, and it's only getting bigger.
That's amazing, to be able to move to a place where other people passionately believe in being free and independent.
What the Free State Project is managing to do, though, is to put their money where their mouth is. It's physically getting up across the country and saying, let's go someplace and let's demonstrate the power of these ideas. There's a lot of kind of philosophy that surrounds liberty. There's a lot of thinking about it and talking about it. But here in New Hampshire, people are doing it.
101 Reasons Liberty Lives in New Hampshire, a documentary by Free State Project Early Movers. Watch it free at 101reasonsfilm.com. 101reasonsfilm.com.
My name is Jacob Hornberger. I'm president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, which Congressman Ron Paul awarded for having an outstanding freedom website. Write us at fff@fff.org, and we'll send you a free 3-month subscription to our monthly journal of libertarian essays and our booklet, Economic Liberty in the Constitution, which George Mason University economics professor Walter Williams praised in a recent column. That's fff@fff.org.
What if you want to hear the latest episode of Free Talk Live, but all you have is your phone, you forgot to download our archive, and you have no data connection? You can call our Listen line at 641-793-0191. That's a long-distance number, so you may incur charges. If not, listen as long as you want. 641-793-0191. The Free Talk Live Listen line, 641-793-0191.
The latest episode of Free Talk Live continues with Hour 2 up next after the news here at listen.freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Kate Fisher. Donald Trump's sentencing has been postponed following the United States Supreme Court's controversial decision to provide criminal immunity for U.S. presidents. He was due to appear in court in New York next Thursday, having been convicted for falsifying business records, a guilty verdict that Trump says he'll appeal. He was due to appear in court in New York next Thursday, having been convicted for falsifying business records, a guilty verdict that Trump says he'll appeal. But the judge has confirmed the sentencing is officially delayed until mid-September, after Trump argued his conviction should be overturned amid Monday's landmark Supreme Court ruling, as Benji Hire explains.
It's been quite the 24 hours for Donald Trump, the first current or former US president to be criminally convicted, now running for the White House again. He asked for his sentencing to be adjourned on the basis that the Supreme Court granted him immunity from prosecution for official actions he took while in office. It's not clear whether his crime in this case, concealing a payment to buy the silence of a porn star to cover up an affair in the final days of the 2016 election campaign, counts as an official act. But prosecutors agreed to his request, and that means the sentencing, whilst this is deliberated, is rescheduled until September 18th.
Texas Congressman Lloyd Doggett from the state's liberal capital, Austin, has become the first House Democrat to call on President Joe Biden to drop out of the presidential race, following his dismal performance during last week's debate. Tony Waterman has more from Austin.
In a statement, Doggett said that while Biden had done much for America, too much was at stake to risk a Trump victory, saying he's hopeful the president will make the painful and difficult decision to withdraw from the race. Doggett is the first sitting Democrat to publicly call on Biden to step aside, vocalizing what some Democrats have been talking about privately.
The United Nations says it's concerned by new Israeli military evacuation orders from Khan Yunis in Gaza. An estimated 250,000 people are set to be impacted. Meanwhile, the Security Council received an update on the humanitarian situation, with UN officials calling on Israel to find solutions to enable the safe delivery of aid in the enclave. Jody Jacobs reports from the United Nations headquarters in New York.
The United Nations says it is still not able to deliver aid in quantities required. Sigrid Kaag, the humanitarian and reconstruction coordinator for Gaza, telling the United Nations Security Council that the war has not only created a humanitarian crisis, it has unleashed a maelstrom of human misery.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks. The French President Emmanuel Macron has less than a week to save France from the prospect of a government dominated by the far right. After gambling on a snap election, the French leader is so far on the losing end of the bet. The far-right Rassemblement National won more than a third of the vote in the first round of voting. Its leader Marine Le Pen boasted of wiping out the alliance led by President Macron, which placed third behind a left-wing coalition. Sophie Pedder is Paris bureau chief for The Economist. She says Macron is facing a political earthquake.
His argument is, the values that the far right embrace are not his values. He didn't use the term keep out the far right, but he was implying that. I think that he has already taken a bit of a backseat during the last week of campaigning. I think he's beginning to understand that it's not helpful, even to his own candidates. It's going to be a campaign that is very much led by the candidates in each constituency, some of them in very, very close contests from his own party. They did come top in about 60 or so constituencies. So, I mean, this isn't a wipeout of the scale where he has no chance of getting seats. But it's going to be difficult, and they will definitely be fighting all the way to try and make sure that the far right doesn't get into power.
But if the far right wins in the second round this coming weekend, its leaders will have their fingertips on power in France for the first time since the end of World War II. With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks.
Our main news again. Donald Trump's sentencing has been postponed following the United States Supreme Court's controversial decision to provide criminal immunity for U.S. presidents. A Texas congressman has become the first House Democrat to call on President Joe Biden to drop out of the presidential race. And the UN says it's concerned by new Israeli military evacuation orders from Khan Yunis in Gaza. That's the latest feature story news. Kate Fisher reporting.
Calling it the most effective means to reaching one's full earning potential. A new report issued by the Employee Benefit Research Institute this week found that violently slamming one's supervisor against a wall and shouting, "Cash, I need more cash," is still the leading tactic for securing a raise amongst American workers.
We found that employees have the most success negotiating their salaries when they stride confidently into their supervisor's office, manhandle them like a rag doll, and demand more money right now.
Experts confirmed that the majority of employees who managed to increase their salaries maintained direct eye contact with their supervisors while reiterating that they were not f***ing around, emphasizing their position with phrases such as, "Give me the money now," and "I said more cash, old man." The Onion sat down with Kevin Simmons, who recently applied these methods in negotiating a competitive bump in his annual salary.
So the other day I walked right into his office, grabbed his throat with my hand, and told him straight up, "Start paying me more f***ing money today." And I grabbed $100 out of his wallet and told him that was a good start.
This is the Onion News Network.
Yep, we still do email. Drop your email address in the entry box at freetalklive.com, and you'll be kept in the loop with Free Talk Live. Free Talk Live.
Well, what's up, all of our liberty-loving friends? This is another fantastic episode of Liberty at Night with Nate and Charlie on the Free Talk Live Network, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. And, of course, Free Talk Live is brought to you by Dash Digital Cash with fees of less than a penny per transaction. Dash is made for spending. Dash is one of the oldest cryptocurrencies and is widely available on exchanges, including the decentralized Maya protocol and the multi-crypto wallets. Thanks to the Dash DAO for sending us 32 Dash per month for this sponsorship. It's easy to get and use Dash. You can learn more at dash.org. That's dash.org. Of course, before we get going here with this Denver basic income study thing and our old pal Dan Price from Seattle, got to tell you guys to go find our daily podcast every single day of the week when we want to. That's Good Morning Liberty. You can find Good Morning Liberty on your favorite podcast app. You can watch the video for the episode on YouTube or Odyssey or Rumble, or if you're watching or listening on Spotify. We now have the videos for the episodes up on Spotify, so that's cool too. So find Good Morning Liberty on your favorite podcast app. And you can put BernieLies.com in your browser to bring up all of our links. Dan Price Seattle is back. He's
emerged.
He's thrown off his allegations of improprieties, and he is now back online. He used to frequent Dumb Bleep of the Week quite a bit. He was on there a lot, actually. And I wanted to talk about this basic income pilot program that happened in Denver. Dan Price said, go ahead, Charlie.
Denver gave homeless people $1,000 a month, no strings attached. A year later, 45% secured housing. Taxpayers saved $590,000 because of fewer visits to the hospital, jail, and shelters. People used the money on groceries, rent, hygiene, clothes, and transportation, and drugs. Mental health improved, and they could spend more time with their kids and grandkids. Amazing what happens when you give people a chance.
And doesn't that just sound great?
It sounds great.
Turns out the solution...
Let's just give everyone $1 million a month.
Turns out the solution is money. The solution to not having money is to have money.
Yep.
That's the actual problem. And so far, that's what he's trying to tell you they should do. Now they had 800 participants that they tried to get in this trial. I think it ended up being a little over 600 people that they gave money to. And I wanted to explain some of this study to you. Okay, so let's go to Business Insider. They say Denver gave people experiencing homelessness $1,000 a month. A year later, nearly half the participants had housing. How about that? I want to just go straight into the study, actually, because I can tell you all this stuff. Of course, Business Insider just talks about how great this was and how it worked and how it proves that universal basic income would be a good idea and all that kind of stuff. Not to mention, this program was funded by a private donor who came in, and it was a little less than $10 million program, mostly funded by a private donor. $4 million of it ended up coming from the government, the city of Denver, and $6 million or so came from the private donor to do this. So that's important information for later on. They ended up only having about 600 people in the study altogether. And one of our main things when we talk about this is a big claim that we'll make is you do universal basic income, you're clearly going to have massive inflation that happens afterwards.
If you do it nationwide. Yeah.
If you do it, if everyone. Now, when you do a small program like this, now this is actually the biggest one we've seen so far. It's got 600 people. Typically, you'll see like 80 to 150 people in some cities program. 600 people, that's one of the bigger ones I've seen. But when you do it on a small scale like that, you don't give money to enough people to actually affect the pricing of the entire area, And what would happen if everyone were being given, like, say, that Andrew Yang plan of $1,000 a month going to everyone? 1,000 becomes zero. That's what happens. Not to mention, also, we're talking about how this probably wouldn't work. There's also a moral side of this, which is that you shouldn't take money from people and give it to other people who didn't earn it. It's immoral to do that. Taxation is theft, and it's immoral. And I don't want to forget that point. I don't just want to argue on the basis that these things don't work or that they wouldn't work. I also want to say, even if it did work, it would still be immoral, and we shouldn't do it. Just want to get that out.
Amen.
Out of the way. You agree?
Yes.
So let's talk about the trial. Here's how they did it, Charlie. Let me explain this to you. Okay. Eligible applicants were randomly assigned to one of the three payment groups. They had three groups. Group A, they got $1,000 a month for 12 months for a total of $12,000 in a year. I don't know if you got a calculator handy, but I need to check that. Group B, they got $6,500 upon enrollment, so up front, and then they got $500 a month for a subsequent 11 months afterwards for a total of $12,000 in a year. And then Group C, Group C got $50 a month for 12 months for a total of $600 in a year. Group C, here's the first big problem with the study. Group C is acting as an active comparison group to understand what may happen when people receive a much smaller guaranteed income. The problem, first off, with this study is that they don't have a control group. They don't know what happened in a normal group of 200 homeless people. Okay, that's pretty important to know. Why is that important to know? Because we have about 600,000 homeless people in the U.S., but they're not always the same people.
That number remains pretty consistent.
It's like the same percentage of the population ends up being homeless, but they are different people throughout the year. About 20%.
Same argument was made, I saw on TikTok the other day. This guy was arguing that Christians don't really like kids because if so, the 300,000 that are in the foster care system would all be adopted. But I'm like, that's a revolving door.
Yeah, they're not just 300,000 people
300,000 kids.
Yeah, even if they are getting adopted, there's more kids
that are coming
into it.
Yes.
So
even if you adopted all 300,000 right now, tomorrow there would be more that would enter the system.
So an important question doesn't get answered in this study, which is what happens in a normal group of 200 homeless people. How many of them get a place to live, get a job during
their mental health
during 12 months? Okay, we don't know because these groups are actual flesh and blood human beings. They're not always the same people in the group. Like when you look at income quintiles, they say, oh, the top 1% has got, look at income inequality. This group is making this much and the bottom, they're still making this much right here. Well, those are different people. Some of those people came from the bottom. They started from the bottom, and now they're here.
Yeah. Drake wrote a song about that.
I know, about the different income quintiles in the United States. And he was saying the bottom 20%, they're not the same group of people. They move up, and new people come in to the bottom 20%.
And some people move down.
That's true. A lot of people move out of the top 10 or 20%. All right, so that's important. The other important thing to note here is that the research activities were voluntary, and participation or non-participation did not impact their monthly payments, which means not everyone reported to the study. They still got paid their money, but they did not get answers on how their lives changed over those 12 months from a certain amount of people. And if they didn't answer, they still got money. But then what we're looking at in the stats here are only the people who kept up with reporting how their lives had changed throughout this time. In fact, what you'll find is in Group A, 33% of the people did not report what happened in their lives. In Group B, 41% of the people did not report what happened in their lives. And in Group C, 38% of the people. Roughly 30 to 40% of the people in this study, for some reason,
didn't feel like answering questions.
Did not answer the questionnaires.
Yeah.
Like, did you get on drugs during this time? We don't know. There's 40%. Maybe they were so busy being the CEO of a Fortune 500 company because they got this $1,000 a month that they didn't have time to answer back on the study. Yeah. I'm saying it could be either one of those things. Yeah. There's no way of knowing what happened. So that's concerning to me, because that's going to juke the stats quite a bit when you only report based on what the 60% of people came back and told you.
But what do you know, Nate? You're not an academic, you know?
I'm not, no.
You don't do official research.
No. I'm just making stuff up right now. And this is probably the most important chart before you look at anything else in this study. They have the 3 different groups, A, B, and C. This is the probability of being unhoused over the course of the first 12 months. These are unhoused people. What's the probability of being unhoused over the first 12 months? What you find is Group B and C end up with the same probability of being unhoused after 12 months, with Group A being a little bit less. They're all within the statistical error bars, the deviations around them, the confidence intervals, I guess is what those would be called, around them. They are all within those intervals of each other, basically showing that the probability of being unhoused, whether you got $1,000 a month, $6,500 plus $500 a month up front, or $6,500 up front plus $500 a month after that, or $50, they all have the same probability of being unhoused.
Statistically, they're the same.
Yes, because they're all within the
margin of error.
The margin of error. Yeah. So I want to go through Dan Price's tweet here. He said 45% secured housing. Now that's 45% of the 60% that reported their results. First off, but 45% secured housing. Well, that's true. I mean, we got 44% right here. And maybe he's doing an average, I guess. Total participants in a house or apartment they rent or own at the end of this study. It's 44% for people who got $1,000 a month, and it's 43% for people who got $50 a month. That's statistically the same thing.
Yeah.
And so you got to go back to that first original question, which is why do we not have a control group who receive no money so we could see what typically happens with a group of 200 homeless people, randomly assigned, randomly chosen homeless people? Okay? We don't have that. So what...
But even if you look at the control group who got $50 a month, let's call that zero, basically. Yeah. They still got the same.
So you can essentially call Group C the control group and say, yeah, they're the same. I don't think $50 a month put you over the line where you could finally afford that $1,200 a month apartment or whatever it was,
right?
You know?
Yeah.
And so,
well, they were able to finally afford that box, you know?
Yeah.
$50 a month can sustain their box.
So when Dan Price says 45% secured housing, yeah, that's true. Whether you got money or you essentially didn't get money in this study.
Yeah.
That's the first part. What about the next one? This one's fun. Taxpayers saved $590,000 because of fewer visits to the hospital, jail, and shelters. Now that's pretty crazy when you think about it. Why? Because it is crazy and it doesn't make any sense. They save $590,000. Here's the chart. Look at it. I mean, they got the data here. They got Group A, B, and C. You see how much less they spent on all of these public services. $223,000 less for Group A. $152,000 less for Group B. What they really found was that giving people an upfront $6,500 was not a good idea. It just didn't work very well. And Group C, who essentially got nothing, they also spent $213,000 less.
Same as Group A.
Basically, statistically the same as Group A.
$1,000 a month is the same thing as $50 a month.
The per capita change is pretty funny. And I realized they
looks like jail cost increased.
It did
for both A and B, but not for C.
Went up a little bit,
but not for
not the one who didn't get the money. I didn't even notice that. That's good.
Oh man!
I noticed down here at the bottom they put total cost change, but they didn't put the total per capita change. And I wonder, why wouldn't you put the total per capita change? Because that would be way easier for people to figure out how much of a savings this was. Well, the problem is, because I went ahead and I did all the math on the whole thing this morning. The total per capita change for Group A was that they saved $1,762 per capita. Group B, they saved $620 per capita. Group C saved more, $1,792 per capita. Remember, the groups ended up with a little bit different numbers of people in them. Ended up being a little bit more people in Group C. Okay, 2 more people ended up reporting in Group C. And so that's kind of important when you look at something like, oh, look, Group C saved a little bit less money than Group A. Well, Group C had more people in it, and they saved a little less money. But when you look per capita, they saved less money. But then look at this. Per capita, Group A saved $1,762 for the taxpayers. They got paid $12,000
from the
per capita. Okay, now in this case, 60% of that came from a private donor, and 40% of it came from the government.
Okay.
And so when Dan Price says taxpayers save $590,000 because of fewer visits, because this one was privately funded.
Well, even take the 40%. It's still over the 40% of the taxpayers.
So it's still over that for sure. But let's pretend it was all privately funded. You could make the argument that taxpayers save money, but that's because the taxpayers didn't pay for this program. But in this case, they paid for 40% of this program. But there was much more money spent, except for in Group C, the group that didn't get anything. In Group A, let's pretend this was all taxpayers paying for this. Group A, they lost $2.2 million. Group B, they lost $2.1 million. Group C, they actually saved $75,000 on the
control group.
Guys, they lost over $2 million on Group A and B. The one that got $50 a month, the taxpayers actually made $75,000 on.
Oh my God. You can't make this up.
That's great.
Yeah.
This is why I couldn't wait for Dumb Bleep of the Week on this. We just had to, we had to do this right here.
So basically it turns out that if you don't give anybody money, that they'll find a way.
The thing is, so I was looking up the stats, and about 22% of homeless people are what they call chronically homeless. So they just experience it off and on, or just consistently, like throughout their lives. The rest of them are people who are homeless for a month and then they're off of it. Okay. Who do you think are probably people who are chronically homeless? Like, who would you say is probably in that group?
The ones living in the tents?
Yeah. But like, what kind of life, what are they dealing with? Why they end up being just homeless like this?
Typically drugs.
Okay. Yeah. That's probably the first thing I would go with too. Dan says people use the money on groceries, rent, hygiene, clothes. The mental health improved and they could spend more time with their kids and grandkids. Interesting. Eligibility criteria for participation, including being 18 years or older, accessing services from one of the partner agencies, and not having severe and unaddressed mental health or substance use needs. They didn't accept applicants who were addicted to drugs or had severe mental health problems.
So basically, the people who participated were already transitory homeless people.
Were people who weren't chronically homeless people that are only homeless for a month and then they aren't homeless. I don't know exactly how long it is. I tried to find stats on it and I couldn't find it.
Jesus Christ.
For instance, oh crap, where's that thing?
He had a thing, guys. He had a thing.
Everyone, please hold for
He had a thing, and it's not there on the show.
Please hold for the thing.
Yeah.
Come
on, Mr. Producer.
It's an important one.
Cue the thing. Where's Jamie?
We need him. Mr. Producer.
Jamie, can you pull the thing up? Okay, thanks. Yeah. Blow that up there. Yeah.
For instance, the homeless population in California, 82% of them suffer from a mental health condition. 65% of them regularly use illicit drugs. And 62% are heavy drinkers. They didn't say anything about alcohol on this, but in the specific study that proves that this worked, they did not accept those people.
Yeah.
But we're supposed to take this.
Go back to that. It says they intentionally adopted a broad definition of homelessness, which includes individuals without fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence, except for those that are on drugs or have any mental health concerns.
Yeah.
So
that's it. That's the show. It's fun. I like going through stuff like that.
Oh my God.
In order to
Magoo says super unhome me.
In order for them to give you a study that shows that basic income works for homeless people, they had to exclude people who have mental health conditions or were illicit drug users, which is up to 80% of homeless people. Okay.
If we use similar numbers to California.
They also had 40% of the people that didn't report whether or not they got homes or what they spent the money on or anything like that. So we don't know why those 40% of people dropped out at all.
And per capita, the best group was Group C, who only got $50 a month.
Who ended up with the same results as the other people who got $1,000 a month. Meaning you can deduce from that stat that they have picked a group of people who are not chronically homeless people. They're transitory homeless people. Okay. That's what we found. A little bit of a white pill here. Missouri and Kansas judges are temporarily halting much of Biden's student debt forgiveness plan. I get it. Student debt is bad. The interest rates are typically very high, and they should be. Maybe that would trigger some people. Maybe you don't like the idea of interest at all or whatever it is. The interest rates should be high. They should be high enough that they actually dissuade some people from going to college because they shouldn't be going to college to get worthless degrees. And so the interest rate should be high. Plus, they're not all going to pay it back because they're going to be getting worthless degrees and they're not going to have the money to pay the loans back. Okay, the interest rates are high. We get it. I'm paying like a 9% interest rate on one of my student loans. And I have like a 4% interest rate on the other one. I got out of college in 2008, I believe. Let me see. I'm trying to check that. 9, something like that. And I'm still paying my loans. Still paying them right now. 15 years later, I'm still paying those student loans. And I still have like $8,000 left to pay. And my first 2 years were free. I was on scholarship. These are just from the last 2 years, of which I did not attend very often. And that is my fault. That is not your fault. There's absolutely no reason I should want you, dear listener, to pay for those loans. That makes no sense whatsoever, does it? That is a debt that I took out, and I should be the one to pay it back. Now, I don't qualify for any of this forgiveness because my loans got bought by, well, they were through a private company, and these are only for federally funded or federally, whatever it is. I don't qualify. Mine are through Mohila. They're private. They don't qualify. That's what's going on right now with me. We'll get into the student loan thing a little bit more and a whole lot more stuff coming right up on Liberty at Night on the Free Talk Live network. We got Dumb Bleep of the Week coming up as well, and it is, as usual, a doozy. We'll see who the live group, the Head Haters Club, picks for the Dumb Bleep of the Week coming right up.
If you're looking for work, or even if you're not, here's an innocent mistake you really want to avoid. Never return calls before listening to your voicemail. Your wireless phone sends calls you didn't answer into voicemail, and it shows you phone numbers for calls you missed. Important, don't call back callers you missed until you have first listened to your messages. Otherwise, you frustrate people who bothered to leave messages by asking them to repeat a message they just left as your voicemail greeting instructed them to. If you're a job applicant, this alone could be a deal killer. And even if you're not, there are few things you can convey to someone that are as fundamentally maddening as, "I didn't hear you." With money and attention so scarce now, effective communication skills have never been more important. For more tips for job seekers and everyone else, hit survivalspeech.com. I'm Holland Cook.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Kate Fisher. Donald Trump's sentencing has been postponed following the United States Supreme Court's controversial decision to provide criminal immunity for U.S. presidents. He was due to appear in court in New York next Thursday, having been convicted for falsifying business records, a guilty verdict that Trump says he'll appeal. He was due to appear in court in New York next Thursday, having been convicted for falsifying business records, a guilty verdict that Trump says he'll appeal. But the judge has confirmed the sentencing is officially delayed until mid-September, after Trump argued his conviction should be overturned amid Monday's landmark Supreme Court ruling, as Benji Hire explains.
It's been quite the 24 hours for Donald Trump, the first current or former US president to be criminally convicted, now running for the White House again. He asked for his sentencing to be adjourned on the basis that the Supreme Court granted him immunity from prosecution for official actions he took while in office. It's not clear whether his crime in this case, concealing a payment to buy the silence of a porn star to cover up an affair in the final days of the 2016 election campaign, counts as an official act. But prosecutors agreed to his request, and that means the sentencing, whilst this is deliberated, is rescheduled until September 18th.
Texas Congressman Lloyd Doggett from the state's liberal capital, Austin, has become the first House Democrat to call on President Joe Biden to drop out of the presidential race, following his dismal performance during last week's debate. Tony Waterman has more from Austin.
In a statement, Doggett said that while Biden had done much for America, too much was at stake to risk a Trump victory, saying he's hopeful the president will make the painful and difficult decision to withdraw from the race. Doggett is the first sitting Democrat to publicly call on Biden to step aside, vocalizing what some Democrats have been talking about privately.
The United Nations says it's concerned by new Israeli military evacuation orders from Khan Yunis in Gaza. An estimated 250,000 people are set to be impacted. Meanwhile, the Security Council received an update on the humanitarian situation, with UN officials calling on Israel to find solutions to enable the safe delivery of aid in the enclave. Jody Jacobs reports from the United Nations headquarters in New York.
The United Nations says it is still not able to deliver aid in quantities required. Sigrid Kaag, the humanitarian and reconstruction coordinator for Gaza, telling the United Nations Security Council that the war has not only created a humanitarian crisis, it has unleashed a maelstrom of human misery.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Got Telegram? You can follow our channel there and discuss show prep with other listeners at telegram.freetalklive.com.
Federal judges in Kansas and Missouri on Monday blocked much of a Biden administration's student loan repayment plan that provides a faster path to cancellation and lower monthly payments for millions of borrowers. The judges' rulings prevent the U.S. Department of Education from helping many of the intended borrowers ease their loan payment burdens going forward under rules set to go in effect on July 1st. The decisions do not cancel assistance already provided to borrowers. It's kind of funny how this whole thing is playing out once again right before an election. We had that promise to cancel, I don't remember how much in student loans. It was $20,000 per person plus a little bit more right before the 22 elections. And then, of course, Republicans were blocking that. And now we have this other massive announcement to cancel, to make it easier to cancel a bunch of people's loans. And now this is getting blocked right before an election. This election is not a sealed deal, by the way. I still don't think it is. This student loan thing, I don't think it'll play into it that much. But there are still some things that could change that. I mean, we still have Trump's sentencing. That could be a big day. That could be a really big deal for sure. We'll see. We also have this X factor of reproductive freedoms, abortion. We have ballot measures going on in several states, some of them swing states, for state constitutional rights to abortion, things like that. And in 2022, I think people underestimated how many people would come out to vote for that. And I worry that we're underestimating that once again. And remember, we still have all the way up until November for shenanigans to happen. So just keep that in mind. I don't think this is a sealed deal yet. Maybe you don't even care, but a lot of libertarians or libertarian-leaning people or people who listen to this show, I think, tend to prefer Trump over Biden, even though you might realize that the lesser of two evils is still evil. You might still prefer a certain evil get into office versus the other. In Kansas, U.S. District Judge Daniel Crabtree ruled in a lawsuit filed by the state's attorney general on behalf of his state and 10 others. In his ruling, Crabtree allowed parts of the program that allow students who borrowed $12,000 or less to have the rest of their loans forgiven if they make 10 years worth of payments instead of the standard 25. But Crabtree said that the Department of Education won't be allowed to implement parts of the program meant to help students who had larger loans and could have their monthly payments lowered and their required payment period reduced from 25 years to 20. So there was a standard percentage that you were supposed to pay every month, and if you did that for a certain amount of years, you could have your loan canceled. The Biden administration cut that number in half, I'm pretty sure, and they lowered the amount of years that you had to make payments before you would be eligible for cancellation. None of these things really matter. You should be paying off the loan that you got in. Anytime that you make it easier even to get towards cancellation, even if you're not just outright canceling everything, but you make it much easier to move towards cancellation, like saying, oh, you only have to pay this tiny amount for 10 years, that becomes the price of a loan. The rest of it gets canceled. That becomes the price of the school, regardless of however much they say they charged you. You're going to pay a small percentage for 10 years, and that becomes the actual price. This, in effect, makes it easier for people to take out these loans to go to college. It makes them appear cheaper, even though the government is paying the full price for the college. And by government, I mean you are paying the full price, but it incentivizes more people to go to college and to potentially get worthless degrees. The solution to this problem is that the government should not be involved in the student loan market whatsoever. It should be private lenders giving people loans to go to college. When you say things like that, the first thing that pops up is, well, that might make college more expensive. It might make it harder for some people to go to college. It might make the interest rates much higher. Sure. A lot of people go to college that don't need to go to college. A lot of people go and get degrees that no one needs to pay for, least of all me. I don't need to pay for your worthless degree that you're not going to get a job in that field even, but you just want to say that you have a degree. We're moving towards a period of time where corporations are realizing that a college degree is meaningless and they're just looking more into whether or not someone can do the job. or if they can fulfill their DEI criteria, either one of those two things, whichever one. So yeah, it would end up with a lot of people not going to college. We need to throw off this idea that everyone must go to college, and if someone can't go to college to get their liberal arts degree, that's not exactly a bad thing. That doesn't mean that person has been oppressed. That doesn't make them a victim. Doesn't mean that they're marginalized, that they couldn't force someone else to pay for their liberal arts degree at Columbia. It's not what that means. We want a merit-based society, and a lot of these degrees don't have merit. And if you put this in the hands of private lenders, they would say, look at this, and they would look at that, and they would say, well, that is a bad investment. Why would we put money towards that? They're not going to be able to get a job in this field. They're not going to get a high enough paying job to pay back this loan. And so they either won't offer the loan, or they'll offer a much lower amount of money for that loan, for that degree. And what would the response from the colleges be? Because so far, the response from the colleges has been, well, the government will basically pay anything that we say that we're going to charge, and therefore we're just going to keep raising our rates forever, faster than inflation, and it doesn't matter because the government's just going to pay it, and then these students are going to get their loans canceled, or they're just going to be screwed forever, and who cares? We already got our money. You get a private lender comes in there and says, well, this degree is not worth that much money. That's not worth this much of an investment from us. This job that this person might get is a low-paying job, and there's not a lot of them out there. Sure, we'll give you a loan to go get this, but we're only going to give you 10 grand. We're not going to give you 100 grand. So then the college has to make a decision. They have to ask a question. They say, can we charge less money and still survive? So maybe they'll charge less money, or maybe they'll stop offering worthless degrees. I don't know. One of those things. Okay, let's move on to something else. Here we go. Here's a nice white pill for you. This is good news. Breaking news. We finally have a fact check. All this time we were questioning the validity of these arguments, but we have a fact check from Snopes, which is, yes, a left-wing fact checker who is now saying, no, Trump did not call neo-Nazis and white supremacists very fine people. I'm shocked by that. I'm shocked that they did this. I'm not shocked that it took them 7 years to do this, through numerous election cycles, through hundreds to maybe thousands of left-wing politicians lying about this, people in the media lying about this constantly. This is one of the things that led us, as we were doing our podcast, to come off as defenders of Donald Trump. Because things like this happen very often. This idea that Trump called neo-Nazis very fine people was everywhere. It's still everywhere. I know that just within the last few weeks, we had the Biden-Harris campaign putting out a statement mentioning that Trump called Nazis very fine people just within the last few weeks, or say within the last month. It's still everywhere. At the very highest echelon of political candidates, it's still there. And they're still allowed to say it. And the people in the media don't immediately call them out for it, because the media has been complicit in this, obviously, as well. And so we came off as people who were defending Donald Trump. What we were really defending was the truth. Hey, I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I had 2 opportunities to vote for Trump, and I said, nay, I'm going to vote. I wrote in Ron Paul one year, and I did vote for Jo Jorgensen. She's great, okay? And by the way, she's way more anarchist than she came off in her campaign, just on a side note. Backroom speak. She's like ANCAP. Not as a presidential candidate, though. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry, but she seems great. Also, Spike Cohen was on the ticket, and that's who I actually voted for, because Spike is amazing. I will knock doors for him if he runs for president in 2028. I'm saying that right now on a microphone. 4 of them, actually. If you guys don't remember, I'm testing out microphones right now, so it's pretty ridiculous to see. So they say false. The claim here is that on August 15th, President Donald Trump called neo-Nazis and white supremacists who attended the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, very fine people. And Snopes says false. In a news conference after the rally, protesting the planned removal of a Confederate statue, Trump did say there were very fine people on both sides, referring to the protesters and the counter-protesters. He said in the same statement he wasn't talking about neo-Nazis and white nationalists who should be condemned totally. Another crazy thing that happened that went all throughout Trump's presidency and even into the 2020 presidential debates was that Trump refuses to condemn white nationalists. How many times did you hear that? Trump refuses to condemn white. He was literally on video condemning white nationalists. The problem was that part of the video was never played anywhere except for on conservative right-wing media shows and libertarian media shows, I guess, who weren't afraid of what the actual truth was. You don't have to come off as defending Donald Trump. You got to come off as defending what the truth is. Let's criticize Trump all day. Let's do it. Yeah, his DOJ is the one that brought charges against Assange. He could have fixed that. Could have fixed that the whole time. He didn't start any new wars, but he certainly continued a bunch of them. Okay, he did sign a deal, ink a deal to get us out of Afghanistan. That's fine. That's good. Spent a ton of money. A lot of money was spent, for sure. A lot of new tariffs, too. Tariffs are paid by American consumers, not by the country that the tariff is on. So sure, plenty of stuff. Maybe his government, maybe his administration could have done something about states that were locking down their citizens. Probably could have. I think that they should have. They should have at least tried. But they seem to be a little bit more complicit in whatever the states decided to do. Maybe you should have fired Anthony Fauci. There's all kinds of ways that we can criticize Trump. Also, he says a lot of crazy stuff. A lot of crazy things, for sure. I don't think he's a principled person whatsoever. I think he's a businessman who wants to win by whatever means necessary. Sure. But I will not go along with people just outright lying about things. And that's what this was. For instance, let's just play the clip. It's the actual clip that I don't know any other ways to say this. And we've talked about this plenty of times. For 7 years, the media has been saying that Trump said that white nationalists and neo-Nazis were very fine people. 7 years. Joe Biden, our current president, said that the reason he decided to run for president was because Donald Trump called neo-Nazis and white supremacists very fine people, and he had to do something about it. So either he was lying, Biden was either lying, or he was just straight up ignorant. With Biden, that's probably a combination of both of them. Very strong and even evenly distributed combination of both of those things, I would say, lying and ignorance. Political candidates all over the country still say this. You can go on Twitter all over the place. X, if you kids don't know what I mean by Twitter. It used to be a website called Twitter, now it's called X. All over the place, this narrative went for 7 years. And you just had to listen to it. When there was an actual video, there was a video of what he said. There was a transcript of what he said. Easily proving that every one of those people were either misinformed or were just outright lying. And the video has existed this entire time. And they still did it. That's a problem. It's a problem that you have that many people, to the tune of millions of people, that were willing to go along with a lie or to be just outright misinformed and never look for the truth because they were so blinded by their political biases and hatred for a person that they would never actually look into the situation themselves. That's scary. What other situations could that play out in? That's why you don't got to defend Donald Trump, but you got to defend the truth. And if that happens to coincide and correspond with defending Donald Trump at the same time, okay, that's fine. It shouldn't matter who the person is. You defend what the truth is. Here's the 2-minute, 24-second clip of this happening.
That were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
Washington and Robert E. Lee are not the same.
No, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
Treated unfairly, sir. I'm sorry, I just didn't understand what you were saying. You were saying the press has treated white nationalists unfairly? I just didn't understand what you were saying.
No. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I'm sure in that group there were some bad ones. The following day it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest, and very legally protest, because, you know, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you this, there are two sides to a story. I thought what took place was a horrible moment for our country, a horrible moment. But there are two sides to the country. Does anybody have a final? Does anybody have, you have an infrastructure.
Now, how do you take away from that clip right there that Donald Trump called neo-Nazis and white supremacists very fine people? Fine people on both sides has been the thing. How do you take away from that? If you listen to that, the outright liars on this were, of course, people in the media who spun this. It's very likely that many people on the left have never actually seen the video of this. They've never read the transcript of this. It's still on them, because you shouldn't just believe everything that the media tells you. So it is still on you for not looking it up. But the media knew what they were doing. They had the whole clip. They decided where they were going to cut it. This was a cheap fake gone wrong, hands down. That's all it was. It will be interesting to see if people keep saying the fine people on both sides myth, or if suddenly, after 7 years, it's just going to disappear. Because now they'll be able to attach a Snopes fact check to the bottom of it, community notes on that thing. Snopes, I believe, is also one of the fact checkers for Facebook and Instagram. And so we'll see if this gets fact checked out of existence and now it's gone, or if they're just gonna keep saying it. They might still choose to believe that he called neo-Nazis and white nationalists very fine people, even though he clearly didn't. And my main issue there is, why are so many people just so willing to lie about this? And this wasn't the only time it happened. That's why over the past few years, well, the past 7 or 8 years now, we've come off as people who were sometimes supporters of Trump. It was really because we just couldn't handle all the lying. There's plenty of true things you could say. If you say that he called immigrants murderers and rapists, that was one of the very first ones. I think that might have been the first one. And then that continued to happen. What happened in that clip? The reporter asked him a question about MS-13 gang members coming across the border. That's where the clip of him calling them murderers and rapists came from. And then that was spun in the media as Donald Trump called all immigrants murderers and rapists, or the majority of immigrants are murderers and rapists, or Mexicans are murderers and rapists. And he was literally answering a question about MS-13 gang members a gang of murderers and rapists. All we can do is report on the facts here, talk about the facts, try to get them out to you guys. You can get them out to other people, and try to be a group of people who looks past whoever the person is that's saying the thing and defends whatever the truth of the moment is, regardless of who it is that said it, because there are people who will just repeat this because they hate Donald Trump, or they won't defend him, or they won't call out the media in this instance simply because they hate Trump. Even if they know what the truth is, they'll just choose to not speak about it. It's a very dangerous precedent to set. You don't know what the next thing is going to be that millions of people are going to jump on that's not true. Could be anything. All right, that's the show for today. Thanks so much for hanging out. I appreciate every one of you being here. Sorry I wasn't able to go live today. If you're in the live group and you're listening right now, I'm sorry. This was very impromptu and needed to get it done a little bit earlier today, but we'll be back live tomorrow. And of course, we got Dumb Bleep of the Week on Friday, everyone's favorite thing. Next week's going to be a little bit messed up because we got the 4th. Also, my brother's birthday is the day before, so I'll be leaving on Wednesday. We'll be out the rest of the week, but I do have a couple interviews scheduled right now. So we'll still have content that's going to be coming out on those days. Thanks so much for hanging out. Go to GodHatesFeds.com to get God Hates Feds t-shirt. Go to joingml.com to join the live group. Guys, it's $7 a month at minimum. Think of all the different things that you'll spend $7 on in a month. It might be one of the cheapest things because most of those things you're going to do multiple times throughout the month. You know, a couple energy drinks at a gas station, you know, a coffee and a biscuit at Starbucks, whatever those things are. Maybe $7 towards a show or an organization or a group of guys that's out there trying to spread the good word of liberty is one of the greatest investments you could make towards changing things, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to get this out to as many people as possible. We're going to convert people into libertarians. Maybe you're a conservative, you're a Republican right now, and you could be converted into a libertarian. Those are people I think could be converted into being libertarians because they will at least talk about the Constitution and care about it and care about the founding fathers and the reasons that this country was founded in the first place. People on the left, I'm not saying they can't be converted. They can be. But we've always tried to angle more towards people on the right because those are people I think are way, way more potential to be libertarians in the future because they actually hold a lot of these same principles. They've just sort of decided that, well, the government, I guess, has to do some of these things. And we're going to keep telling you why they don't. And we're going to tell you why when they do these things, they make things worse. They make everything worse. And that your whole problem, maybe you're a Trump supporter and you're mad about how he was treated during this time. Maybe you're mad about all sorts of, the whole problem is that the government has too much power. You can't reform some of these people. The power has to be taken away because even if Trump gets in office, it's only going to be for 4 years. And then who's next? You want Gavin Newsom to have all the powers of the state? Look at what he does in California. You want him to have all the powers that the U.S. government currently has, that the president currently has? No. Then you better get working on taking those powers away from the government, even if you like the guy who's in office. That's the only answer to solving any of these problems. Coming right up, we got Dumb Bleep of the Week. We got 7 really dumb things. 7 really dumb things that we're going to be going through in the live group the Fed Haters Club is going to be voting on. This is Liberty at Night with Nate and Charlie on the Free Talk Live Network. And Good Morning Liberty every single day on your podcast app.
Free Talk Live. So what would you imagine how long this body was sitting there for? A matter of weeks? Months?
Probably months.
Months.
There were about 25 or 30 dead cats in the house.
Oh, my goodness.
It was not a pretty scene. Literally It was from the floor to the ceiling. This person had put newspapers and magazines, Life magazines, going back probably to the day one, and Geographic going back into the previous century, and food boxes that were, ancient. And she had lived through a tunnel that basically connected her bedroom area to a bathroom.
What about the kitchen? Did she not prepare food?
She kept food in the bedroom and then had a...
That's nice.
I guess she used her window to get in and out. That's the best we could figure out.
Yeah, this is no problem that a good coat of fire wouldn't fix.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern at freetalklive.com.
There are basically two types of advertising, direct response and branding. Radio's great for direct response with its low cost to listener ratio, but audio can't be beat for branding, which is a longer-term endeavor. You want to be the first thing that someone thinks of when they think about your product or service. If you have a local business that you want kept top of mind in your community, call the station. If you need national reach, Free Talk Live's got around 200 radio stations, millions of monthly listening sessions, can suit all budgets, and if we don't think we're right for you, we'll tell you. Email me, mark@freetalklive.com.
Tired of cancel culture? Sick of mega tech corporations holding an axe over your head? Join the LRN.FM Matrix chat server. It's self-hosted, so no one else can tell us what to do or say. Don't like the existing channels? You can make your own. You can even connect into some of our channels from other Matrix servers. It's federated. For the full LRN.FM Matrix experience, though, you should join our server via the step-by-step instructions at chat.lrn.fm. Chat.lrn.fm.
The latest episode of Free Talk Live continues with Hour 3 up next after the news here at listen.freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Kate Fisher. Donald Trump's sentencing has been postponed following the United States Supreme Court's controversial decision to provide criminal immunity for U.S. presidents. He was due to appear in court in New York next Thursday, having been convicted for falsifying business records, a guilty verdict that Trump says he'll appeal. He was due to appear in court in New York next Thursday, having been convicted for falsifying business records, a guilty verdict that Trump says he'll appeal. But the judge has confirmed the sentencing is officially delayed until mid-September, after Trump argued his conviction should be overturned amid Monday's landmark Supreme Court ruling, as Benji Hire explains.
It's been quite the 24 hours for Donald Trump, the first current or former US president to be criminally convicted, now running for the White House again. He asked for his sentencing to be adjourned on the basis that the Supreme Court granted him immunity from prosecution for official actions he took while in office. It's not clear whether his crime in this case, concealing a payment to buy the silence of a porn star to cover up an affair in the final days of the 2016 election campaign, counts as an official act. But prosecutors agreed to his request, and that means the sentencing, whilst this is deliberated, is rescheduled until September 18th.
Texas Congressman Lloyd Doggett from the state's liberal capital, Austin, has become the first House Democrat to call on President Joe Biden to drop out of the presidential race, following his dismal performance during last week's debate. Tony Waterman has more from Austin.
In a statement, Doggett said that while Biden had done much for America, too much was at stake to risk a Trump victory, saying he's hopeful the president will make the painful and difficult decision to withdraw from the race. Doggett is the first sitting Democrat to publicly call on Biden to step aside, vocalizing what some Democrats have been talking about privately.
The United Nations says it's concerned by new Israeli military evacuation orders from Khan Yunis in Gaza. An estimated 250,000 people are set to be impacted. Meanwhile, the Security Council received an update on the humanitarian situation, with UN officials calling on Israel to find solutions to enable the safe delivery of aid in the enclave. Jody Jacobs reports from the United Nations headquarters in New York.
The United Nations says it is still not able to deliver aid in quantities required. Sigrid Kaag, the Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, telling the United Nations Security Council that the war has not only created a humanitarian crisis, it has unleashed a maelstrom of human misery.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks. The French President Emmanuel Macron has less than a week to save France from the prospect of a government dominated by the far right. After gambling on a snap election, the French leader is so far on the losing end of the bet. The far-right Rassemblement National won more than a third of the vote in the first round of voting. Its leader Marine Le Pen boasted of wiping out the alliance led by President Macron, which placed third behind a left-wing coalition. Sophie Pedder is Paris bureau chief for The Economist. She says Macron is facing a political earthquake.
His argument is, the values that the far right embrace are not his values. He didn't use the term keep out the far right, but he was implying that. I think that he has already taken a bit of a backseat during the last week of campaigning. I think he's beginning to understand that it's not helpful, even to his own candidates. It's going to be a campaign that is very much led by the candidates in each constituency, some of them in very, very close contests from his own party. They did come top in about 60 or so constituencies. So, this isn't a wipeout of the scale where he has no chance of getting seats. But it's going to be difficult, and they will definitely be fighting all the way to try and make sure that the far right doesn't get into power.
But if the far right wins in the second round this coming weekend, its leaders will have their fingertips on power in France for the first time since the end of World War II. With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks.
Our main news again. Donald Trump's sentencing has been postponed following the United States Supreme Court's controversial decision to provide criminal immunity for U.S. presidents. A Texas congressman has become the first House Democrat to call on President Joe Biden to drop out of the presidential race. And the UN says it's concerned by new Israeli military evacuation orders from Khan Yunis in Gaza. That's the latest feature story news. Kate Fisher reporting.
An update now on a legal battle emerging around the Onion News Network's own Jode Kressbeckler. After the shocking story yesterday that a group of assailants attacked Congressman William Cummings, tied him to a horse and dragged him through a briar patch, some are now saying these statements from Mr. Kressbeckler last week may have incited the attack.
Bootlegging Congressman Cummings ought to be tied to a horse and dragged through a briar patch.
Mr. Kressbeckler's show is billed as an opinion and entertainment program.
Yes,
and
he
even calls himself nothing but a caterwauling old badger, so
right.
The claim that he would incite people to violence seems pretty far-fetched.
He displayed a map of Congressman Cummings' home in relation to the nearest briar patch, told his viewers where to purchase a, quote, good pulling horse, and used a life-size dummy of Congressman Cummings to demonstrate effective knot-tying techniques.
Right. I think most reasonable people would see that as simply a ribald political satire.
Right.
Briar patch is obviously a metaphor for the prickly political atmosphere in Washington, and drag from a horse means something else.
Makes sense to me.
This is the Onion News Network.
Our Matrix server is about as free as internet chat can be. Join the existing rooms or create your own at chat.freetalklive.com. Free Talk Live.
It's Liberty Night on the Free Talk Live Network, and it's time to get started with Dumb Bleep of the Week. A lot of dumb things said in the last week. Let's see who the live group chooses for Dumb Bleep of the Week. Number one, the U.S. Surgeon General has declared gun violence a public health crisis. So now, as you know, when you buy a gun, there's going to be a label on the box that says Surgeon General's warning, this may cause death or serious injury, if you shoot someone with it.
Yeah.
One of the problems with this is we saw over the last few years what public health crisis means for the powers of the government. They do a lot of stuff when they decide that there's a public health crisis.
Hello, I'm U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy. Today, for the first time in the history of our office, I am issuing a Surgeon General's advisory on firearm violence. It outlines the urgent threat firearm violence poses to the health and well-being of our country. As a doctor, I've seen the consequences of firearm violence up close in the lives of the patients I've cared for over the years. These are moms and dads, sons and daughters, all of whom were robbed of their physical and mental health by senseless acts of violence. Unfortunately, the problem has continued to grow. These harms are disproportionately felt in our communities.
Of course.
Black individuals endure the highest rates of firearm homicides, while suicide rates are highest among veterans, older white individuals, and younger American Indian and Alaska Native people. What is especially devastating is how this has affected our children. firearm violence has become the number one cause of death among children and adolescents, more than car accidents or drug overdoses.
Okay, this one is super annoying. You know, this whole firearm deaths, the leading cause of death for children and adolescents thing? Mm-hmm. There's an important stat on here that you can't see because I don't have it on full screen, but I'll put it on full screen for a minute. It says 1 to 19 years of age in the United States. And you might think, like off the top of your head, well, you know, you turn 18, you're an adult, this goes from 1 to 19. Well, the problem is you're including a bunch of people who are adults. In fact, you're including people who are 18 and people who are 19, mm-hmm. possibly if they go all the way through 19. And you're not including children that are less than 1 year old. That's a pretty interesting way to carve up these statistics. And what I found today was that this is actually something that Snopes has talked about. They talked about it last year, and I didn't expect this. But they did what they normally do when it's something that damages their positions on something. It's not
mostly true.
It's not a fact check.
Oh.
They just talk about an issue. So like they could bring up a claim and they could say, we rate this claim that guns are the leading cause of death for children in the US, and they could rate it as false or mostly false or missing context or whatever it is. They decide not to rate this claim and they just put out an article about it. And they basically construct what is a here's why this is false article without giving you a rating of false, which is pretty great. So an analysis from the Kaiser Family Foundation that relied on 2020 data compiled by the CDC found the firearms were the number one cause of death for children and teens in the U.S. Those deaths included accidents, suicides, and homicides. The analysis found that in 2020 alone, gun-related violence killed 4,357 children ages 1 to 19 in the U.S. By comparison, motor vehicle deaths accounted for 4,112 deaths in that age range. However, the result is different if one removes the 18 and 19-year-olds from the equation. You know, people who are adults.
People who aren't adolescents?
Yeah, that's, if you're talking about, because you make the claim, this is the number one killer of children. I sort of feel like we shouldn't include people who aren't children in that number. And actually, I think that we should include all children to back up that claim. But if you remove 18 and 19-year-olds from the equation, nearly 2,400 children ages 1 to 17 died of vehicle-related injuries in 2020 compared with 2,270 firearm deaths, so making it still the number 2 cause of death like it used to be. It was really in 2020 when people started talking about how, this is now the number 1 cause of death for people. And then you also have to note that they're not including people who are under the age of 1, because then that would really, really throw off the statistics, because infants, people who are under the age of 1 have a lot of random things that they die from, health-related issues that they die from. So first off, the data is clearly skewed to make it look way worse than what it actually is. It doesn't mean it's not a problem. I'm also against 18 and 19-year-olds dying.
I'm against death.
From gun deaths.
In and of itself.
So that's the first thing. What do you think the government's going to do with this new public health emergency that we have?
Probably ban bump stocks.
That's what they should do. Yeah. That's what they... You know what? When Trump gets into office, he should ban bump stocks.
Again.
That's what he should do. Problem solved.
Yeah.
Okay, dumb bleep number 2. How about this? Some people now are calling to ban non-alcoholic beer for people under the age of 21. All over, just everywhere. No one under the age of 21 can get non-alcoholic beer. This one's important to me.
Can you get non-alcoholic beer if you're under 21?
Apparently you can. There are what do they call them? I can't remember the name now, but they're supposed to have less than 0.5% in your normal non-alcoholic beer. There are some that have like none, but they're made to taste like alcohol, like your mocktails and stuff like that. They have no % alcohol in them at all. And then there's also beers that are made that have like absolutely nothing in them, but they're made to sort of taste like beer.
0.0.
Well, that still has technically.
It says 0.0.
It does say, but it's 0.05. Oh. it's what it is.
No, they just left off that 5 off the front of it.
Yeah, that thing. So the question here from Reason is, will banning non-alcoholic beer save the children?
by the way, tomorrow I turn 6. That is, it's been 6 years tomorrow since I've had any alcohol. So pretty crazy.
Wittingly.
Yeah.
You may have had some.
I'm sure
unwittingly.
If there was some mouthwash, some of it got in there, something like that. Or maybe I've consumed enough non-alcoholic beverages that I've consumed technically like 1% of alcohol over all this time. The new plan to keep kids from drinking alcohol is to ban kids and some adults from buying drinks containing zero alcohol. That's the argument being made by Molly A. Bowdrine. This is from Reason, by the way, a clinical psychologist at Stanford who wrote this week in Stat, which is one of their publications, that non-alcoholic drinks meant to resemble beer or cocktails are a potential public health crisis. The zero-proof beverage market includes brands like Athletic Brewing, by far the largest non-alcoholic beer brand. Saw an ad for them last night, by the way. I've never seen an ad for a non-alcoholic beer before. It was just a bunch of people sitting around trying not to fall asleep. As well as a growing number of wine and spirits varieties. While non-alcoholic drinks still account for a tiny sliver of the overall beverage market, the rate of growth in recent years has been impressive, driven by consumers who are looking to enjoy a drink without getting drunk. I went to the actual stat thing, which is called Getting Ahead of Non-Alcoholic Beverage Boom Among Youths. Here's the problem. If you do this whole thing where kids can drink something that looks like they're drinking alcohol, as you know, Charlie, they will grow up to be just wild alcoholics later in life.
It's better they just drink the alcohol.
Yeah. So there's number one.
The problem is the Bud Light is losing sales.
That's the main problem.
Anheuser-Busch sales are going down, not just for their Gatum.
And their
transitory gayness.
If anything, that's helped them with the kids.
Yeah.
Most kids these days drink Bud Light.
The problem is it's competition, so we need to get rid of this competition.
And their non-alcoholic is absolutely terrible, by the way. I would break my 6 years before I drink their non-alcoholic beer. It's so terribly bad. Yeah. And so the idea here is that if kids are able to drink something that looks like it's an alcoholic beverage, similar to when we used to have those candy cigarettes. I don't know about you, but I grew up smoking cigs because I love those candy cigarettes I used to get at the gas station.
Which obviously led to this.
That is why. That's not a correlation equals causation. It is.
No, this is empirical evidence.
Purely a fact that you started smoking cigarettes back in the day because of those candy cigarettes that you used to get at the store. Yeah, and you ate your cigarettes afterwards too. It was the craziest thing I ever saw to save the environment. You just never throw them away. The path from non-alcoholic beverage consumption to alcohol use among youths appears to be fairly direct, or they were just going to drink anyway because that's something fairly normal that a lot of adults do.
Yeah.
And so this is just some correlation here, but not causation. Regulated to contain less than 0.5% alcohol by volume, non-alcoholic beers, wines, liquors, and pre-made mocktails mirror the look and taste of their alcoholic siblings. This may be great for some adults like me, but among minors, consuming non-alcoholic beverages can socialize them to the drinking culture.
You know what's interesting, though? They found there's been several studies that in European cultures where kids are allowed to drink and alcohol is not stigmatized. Okay. They turn out to not be as heavy drinkers as those where it is stigmatized.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. That is one of the things that I was looking into. Now, this isn't true for every single country I could find on here, but I did spend some time today going through the different drinking ages in different countries. Most of Europe is standardized at 18, although some of the countries are actually lower. Some of them you can even start at 14. None of them have rules for drinking.
Like Italy and France, probably.
Yeah, none of them have. France recently raised theirs to 18.
Oh, okay.
None of them have rules for drinking at home. By the way, your parents could buy you alcohol and you could drink at home, and that's fine. Which is actually illegal in some U.S. states also, which I didn't realize. So this isn't the same for all of them, and I'll show you why. But by the way, France, you mentioned them. Their death rate that is attributed to alcohol consumption is 3.29 per 100,000, and their drinking age is 18. Okay, and the U.S. is at 3.5. Our drinking age is 21. And if you go to Germany, though, whose drinking age, I believe a lot of it is still 16. It depends on the alcohol content, is actually higher than the U.S. So it's not the same everywhere. But then you get the U.K., who's also at 18. Well, theirs is at 1.76. It's at half of our rate. You can go around the Netherlands is at 2.12. Ireland is at 1. That's surprising to me. I thought those Irish, thought they really drank a whole lot.
What about the Italians there?
Belgium is 2.78. Italy, 0.26, according to this worldlifeexpectancy.com. And so there is some evidence that could show you that actually destigmatizing drinking alcohol could actually lead people to be more responsible with. I don't know if you know this about kids, but I used to be one. And I used to gravitate towards things that you weren't supposed to do. And in fact, if you even stigmatize non-alcoholic beverages, it's going to make them even cooler than people think they are right now.
Why do you think vaping took off among the youth?
It's like the more you make something you're not supposed to do, the more you'll want to do it as a kid. And I think the actual problem here that these people in government just can't figure out is that it's really a society and culture problem, and actually just coddling children and not allowing them to do anything until they're 21 years old or 18 or 21 years old, that actually doesn't teach them, how to live a good life. It doesn't give them all the life experiences that they should have. And it kind of sets them up for finding out a lot of things a little bit too late in life. Maybe not while you're living at home with your parents and you're drinking and you're making bad decisions or whatever, and you're with your parents still, and you move out and you go do that. And you end up, I don't know, dying in car accidents, or you end up going way too far with it or whatever. Maybe your parents aren't there to help you through it. And so it's not immediately obvious that having a later drinking age is a good thing whatsoever.
When did you take your first drink?
I was 23.
I'm just saying, it's interesting.
And I became a raging alcoholic. I drank from the age of 23 to 30. The whole time. That was it. That was the statement. Whole time. Yeah. That's all I was doing.
Every drink was alcohol.
Anyway, the researchers at Stanford are saying that no problems are showing up right now, but they think that the U.S. needs to get on top of this before any problems emerge and prohibit the sale of any of these beverages to anyone who's not the age of 21, because there could be a problem. You remember this from
Monday,
Wednesday. Tuesday, we talked about Dan Price and the Denver basic income thing. I would recommend everyone go listen to Tuesday's show.
Yes.
Because I think we really tore Dan Price a new one.
Mm-hmm.
I think we did a great job, but let's do it real quick.
All right. Denver gave homeless people $1,000 a month, no strings attached. A year later, 45%. Well, this is not true, by the way. There were 3 different groups. We talked about it, but
There's
anyway.
a community note on it now.
A year later, 45% secured housing. Taxpayers saved $590,000 because of fewer visits to the hospital, jail, and shelters. People used the money on groceries, rent, hygiene, clothes, and transportation. Mental health improved, and they could spend more time with their kids and grandkids. Amazing what happens when you give people a chance. Now, what he fails to mention is that to qualify for the study, you were not allowed to have really any mental health or substance abuse problems. The group that got $1,000 a month and the group that got $50 a month, which was basically the control group, you can say they basically got nothing, had the exact same results.
Statistically, same results.
Actually, the group that per capita, the group that actually saved money was the group that only got $50 a month. Per capita, Group A and Group B, who received larger sums of money, actually cost more.
Well, because the program itself actually costs a lot of money. And what Dan Price failed to mention in there was that if this were a government program fully funded by the government, which now with the stellar results, this is why talking about these things is important. Because of these stellar results that came out of this study, the city government of Denver got together and decided that they were going to contribute another $2 million so they could extend this program for another 6 months. And then basically what's happening is they're going to continue funding this program because it just did so well.
Mm-hmm.
But what the study actually found was the same results occurred for the people who only got 50 versus the people who got 1,000. So if anything, they should just give people $50, I guess. That's what the study proved, because it's way cheaper.
Yeah.
Save a ton of money. But then they're not doing something, which is what they actually want to talk about. You know,
go listen to full breakdown from Tuesday's episode.
Yeah, this guy, one of the comments that was put in here, this came from the live group. This person on the part of taxpayers saving $590,000 because of fewer visits to the hospital, jail, and shelters. First off, it was funny. The groups that got 1,000 or 500 a month actually spent more money on going to jail than the one who only got $50. That went up. But their comment was, this is what conservatives don't understand. Besides being the right way to treat your fellow man, it solves a bunch of problems society faces now before they actually become problems. And this is like the top comment on the tweet. It's got, at this time, 887 retweets and almost 1 million views on it. And there are people who actually will read that, clearly. They'll read it and be like, yeah, of course. But just in this, guys, there's 2 sentences right there. There are so many things that are wrong, besides being the right way to treat your fellow man. Okay, maybe that person. What about the fact that you had to steal money from someone else to give it to that person? That's not the right way to treat your fellow man.
Mm-hmm. So you have to untreat your fellow man to then treat another fellow man.
Mm-hmm. So why is that one more important
why
than the other one?
Why is he leaving out woman? Is it because he doesn't know what a woman is?
Could be. Yeah, could be.
Yeah.
And then they say it solves a bunch of problems that society faces. But that's based on the fact that it saved taxpayers $590,000. But it didn't save taxpayers $590,000 because if it were a government program, they've spent $404.4 million to get the $590,000 in savings, which means it would cost the taxpayers $3.8 million.
3.6.
And that's without...
oh, wait, no, you're right. 3.8.
That's without the administrative fees of actually administering the whole program, too, which is probably another double.
They're going to set up the whole department.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to need somebody to run that department.
People got to study it, make sure it's going okay. So, yeah, it's probably another $4 million on top of that. So, no, it doesn't save people money. But based on like this lie that Dan Price put out there, and then a zero amount of critical thinking about it, you can just say stupid things and feel good about it afterwards. So,
and like, you know, if this is true, if this were true, like, let's just carry it out to its logical conclusion. If it were true, then why stop at $1,000 a month? That's just an arbitrary number.
Yeah.
You know, keep experimenting and carry it out to its logical conclusion. Why not $1 million a month? You know, you could easily solve homelessness.
The logical conclusion is like communism.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Why doesn't the government just give everyone everything that they need all the time? Why even use money anymore? Well, that's just, we don't need to do that. Why not just guarantee that everyone has everything that they need? You know? And then, yeah, the logical conclusion of this idea is communism. That's what it is. Okay, number 4. Infant mortality rate rose 8% in the wake of the Texas abortion ban, study shows. I warned you about this one earlier. Go ahead.
This is so funny. In the wake of Texas's abortion ban, the state's infant death rate increased and more died of birth defects, a study published Monday shows. The analysis out of Johns Hopkins University is the latest research to find higher infant mortality rates in states with abortion restrictions. The researchers looked at how many infants died before their first birthday after Texas adopted its abortion ban in September of 2021. They compared infant deaths in Texas to those in 28 states, some also with restrictions. The researchers calculated that there were 216 more deaths in Texas than expected between March and December the next year.
Oh, sorry. One more here.
In Texas, the 2022 mortality rate for infants went up 8% to 5.75 per 1,000 births, compared to a 2% increase in the rest of the U.S., according to the study in the journal JAMA Pediatrics.
By the way, that means it went from like 5.5 to 5.75, something like that. Or maybe it was like 5.4 to 5.75 was the increase.
Among causes of deaths, birth defects showed a 23% increase compared to a decrease of about 3% in the rest of the U.S. The Texas law blocks abortions after the detection of cardiac activity, usually 5 or 6 weeks into pregnancy, well before tests are done to detect fetal abnormalities. See, we would just kill those.
Yeah.
You know, so that way they wouldn't count in the stats.
The idea behind this article is I'm having a hard time figuring out who actually wrote this and thought that this was a point that should be made.
Well, Suzanne Bell, who is a fertility researcher, says, I think these findings make clear the potentially devastating consequences that abortion bans can have. You know, the problem is that we have more kids being born who end up unfortunately passing away because they might have a defect, it's better off that we just kill them and don't count them towards the infant mortality rate.
Guys,
my thing is why are they not being counted? Why are abortions not counted toward infant mortality? Isn't that isn't that an ending of a life? Shouldn't they count those?
Oh God. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
T-Dub says so they live longer, and that's a bad thing.
Okay, so that last line, the potentially devastating consequences that abortion bans can have. The alternative that she's arguing for is that every one of those kids would have died. That none of them would exist. Okay? Yeah. This one's dumb enough. It deserves to be talked about a little bit more when we come back. Liberty at Night on the Free Talk Live Network. BernieLies.com. BernieLies.com takes you to all of our links.
Hey, you are going to love the movie Victimless Crime Spree. It's hilarious, heartwarming, and carries a ton of inspiring freedom messages. Feeling down about the lack of liberty in your life? You need to put on this film with some friends and have a good laugh. It's a true story about me and my friends in New Hampshire living free, singing, dancing, and getting arrested. Of course, it's all on video, and the bad guys, the cops, judges, bailiffs, and sheriffs, they all play their part like it's out of a movie or something. You would think we scripted the whole thing, but it's real life. Go ahead and have a watch, and if it's been a while, have another look. I guarantee you'll notice things now that you didn't notice before. And the best part is that you're going to walk away feeling a renewed sense of your own power. You are the master of your destiny, and you will be free in your lifetime. Victimless Crime Spree.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Kate Fisher. Donald Trump's sentencing has been postponed following the United States Supreme Court's controversial decision to provide criminal immunity for US presidents. He was due to appear in court in New York next Thursday, having been convicted for falsifying business records, a guilty verdict that Trump says he'll appeal. He was due to appear in court in New York next Thursday, having been convicted for falsifying business records, a guilty verdict that Trump says he'll appeal. But the judge has confirmed the sentencing is officially delayed until mid-September, after Trump argued his conviction should be overturned amid Monday's landmark Supreme Court ruling, as Benji Hire explains.
It's been quite the 24 hours for Donald Trump, the first current or former US president to be criminally convicted, now running for the White House again. He asked for his sentencing to be adjourned on the basis that the Supreme Court granted him immunity from prosecution for official actions he took while in office. It's not clear whether his crime in this case, concealing a payment to buy the silence of a porn star to cover up an affair in the final days of the 2016 election campaign, counts as an official act. But prosecutors agreed to his request, and that means the sentencing, whilst this is deliberated, is rescheduled until September 18th.
Texas Congressman Lloyd Doggett from the state's liberal capital, Austin, has become the first House Democrat to call on President Joe Biden to drop out of the presidential race, following his dismal performance during last week's debate. Tony Waterman has more from Austin.
In a statement, Doggett said that while Biden had done much for America, too much was at stake to risk a Trump victory, saying he's hopeful the president will make the painful and difficult decision to withdraw from the race. Doggett is the first sitting Democrat to publicly call on Biden to step aside, vocalizing what some Democrats have been talking about privately.
The United Nations says it's concerned by new Israeli military evacuation orders from Khan Yunis in Gaza. An estimated 250,000 people are set to be impacted. Meanwhile, the Security Council received an update on the humanitarian situation, with UN officials calling on Israel to find solutions to enable the safe delivery of aid in the enclave. Jody Jacobs reports from the United Nations headquarters in New York.
The United Nations says it is still not able to deliver aid in quantities required. Sigrid Kaag, the humanitarian and reconstruction coordinator for Gaza, telling the United Nations Security Council that the war has not only created a humanitarian crisis, it has unleashed a maelstrom of human misery.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
You can stick it to the man and big tech. Join our FTL social mastodon at social.freetalklive.com.
And this doesn't even have to be a conversation about pro or anti-abortion. This is just a basic WTF is the math on this article right now. Because even if you're pro-abortion right now and you're listening to us right now, someone tell me what the H is actually going on with the math that they're trying to present to people. And what is the idea that they're presenting to people? That the infant mortality rate went up 8% and how many more kids died? What was the actual number? 216. Do you know how many kids before Texas's ban were getting killed via abortion every year in Texas?
I would guess 50,000.
On average, 52,800.
Pretty close.
Do you know how many still get aborted in Texas now after the ban?
40,000.
60.
Jesus.
60 abortions still occurred in Texas after the
60.
ban. 60 total.
Oh, I thought you meant 60,000.
60 occurred. Look. Okay, now that's just according to the Texas Tribune or whatever this one is called right here. 5 abortions a month. How Dobbs changed Texas. In the last 2 years, Texas abortion clinics closed. Legal challenges raced through the court system. Towns tried to ban out-of-state travel. Conservative activists made abortion pills, emergency rooms in the battlegrounds, and woman after woman. Of course, okay, I do want to say that this number probably doesn't account the pill abortions. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. This could be abortions conducted. Okay. And 5 women were able to get an abortion on average each month. Texas, with 30 million residents and 10% of the women of reproductive age in the nation, used to see about 4,400 abortions a month, and now it is 5. And this article comes out and is talking about the infant mortality rate going up, and 216 more deaths occurred because of this abortion ban, where potentially
4,200 more kids were born.
Where 50,000 less kids were aborted.
Oh, yeah.
And possibly born, or maybe less people got pregnant or something like that. And we're talking about 216 kids that died after they were born, and we're blaming that on the people in Texas who put in the heartbeat abortion ban or whatever it is that they have. This is absolutely ridiculous. And by the way, when you try to check and see how many abortions were being conducted in Texas previous to this ban going in place, all you see are articles about the infant mortality rising after the abortion ban. That's all that comes up because it's the most recent stuff written about Texas.
Jesus.
I'm not even trying to make an argument for or against abortion. I'm saying that this argument makes no sense. Just make the argument and say, we don't care. 50,000 kids got aborted. Who gives a shit? Just say that. But don't try to come out and say that Texas Republicans somehow caused the deaths of 213 more kids. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I'll stop yelling.
No, it's good. It's good stuff.
All right. Don't believe number 5.
So they use... Here, the problem is then they use these academic studies, right, to make themselves sound smart and project this, we know more than you.
They're experts.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think the normal person doesn't buy it. Now, they may not be able to articulate why. That's why you listen to this show. You look at it and you're like, okay, something seems off. And what is off is the fact that, well, I don't know. It sounds like around 51,940 kids were born alive, and then of those around 216 died, unfortunately, along with normal births.
Yeah, but now the pro-abortion people are mad about the 213 that died out of the 50.
They should have died in the womb.
Out of the 50,000 that were born. That they wanted to kill in the first place.
Yeah. See, we should allow all 50,000 to be murdered so that we could at least kill these 216 kids with fetal abnormalities in the womb.
Yeah.
rather than them dying outside the womb.
You want to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs, you know? All right.
And you know what? To kill these 216 kids in the womb, it's worth the other 52,000 that would have had to have been murdered for that to be possible. The problem is around 216 women didn't get the choice.
It was the choice
to kill their handicapped kid in the womb.
And that's a choice that all women want. Who doesn't want to kill handicapped children in the womb?
Yeah.
Come on.
It's much harder to let them die naturally, you know? It's harder on the family.
I wanted to kill that handicapped child. I didn't want him to do it. I wanted to do it.
I didn't want God to do it. Plus, then you got to set up a funeral and like all kinds of stuff. It's really hard on the family. It's much easier if you're just able to kill it in the womb and they take it away and sell it to someone and you don't ever have to think about it again.
Yeah.
You know?
It's way better. Dumbly number 5. A little bit of stuff
That's their logic, by the way.
No, it's so ridiculous.
It's insane.
Let's see. This comes from Twitter. This has to do with Assange. Of course, he was released and it looks like the plea deal actually went through and all that. And he made it back to Australia and all that stuff. And by the way, following his guilty plea to unlawfully obtaining and disclosing classified documents, WikiLeaks has removed all the DNC emails from its platform. All emails appear with an internal server error message. As part of the plea deal, Assange must ensure the return or destruction of all the other unpublished information held by him or WikiLeaks and provide a sworn affidavit confirming compliance, effectively limiting his legal exposure and potentially curtailing future leaks. So part of their plea deal for letting this guy out and charging him was that he promised not to release all of the other evidence of their crimes against humanity that they had. And hey, I'm not saying I wouldn't do the same thing if I was in that place, but just think about the moral high ground of the government that they're on right now. Like, hey, we're going to let you go. Just don't tell anyone about those other kids that we murdered.
Yeah.
Like, I know that you've been holding back. Because I think he had said something like, hey, if I die in prison, something fishy happens, if I get assassinated, there's a lot of stuff that's going to come out. We're holding back on a lot more stuff right now. And so part of the plea deal is that they have to get rid of all of it. And if they do leak anything in the future, or if anything comes from WikiLeaks, guarantee you, they're going to throw them right back in the gulags. So
maybe him and his family should move to a country that has no extradition.
I would definitely do that.
Yeah.
Yes. He should go maybe share a place with Snowden or something like that, you know?
And then release all the stuff.
Yeah. And number 5 still was Mike Pence's reaction. I know we already talked about some of this stuff on Monday, but it needs to be voted on for dumb bleep. And he said,
Julian Assange endangered the lives of our troops and our congressmen and congresswomen and the DOD
and their power
in a time of war and should have been prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Does he feel the same way about Trump and how he handled classified documents and Biden?
No.
Okay.
No, he doesn't.
The Biden administration's plea deal with Assange is a miscarriage of justice and dishonors the service and sacrifice of the men and women of our armed forces and their families who fought so hard to commit war crimes that should have been covered up. You know, it's almost like which I love the military, but it's almost like, you know, to some of these people, if you're in the military, you just have a license to do whatever you want.
Well, you got to do what you're told to do. They're just following orders.
Yeah.
You know, hey, I love the armed forces too. I'm wearing my armed forces hat today.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, I mean, the Germans were doing what they were told to do. Like, how are they held responsible for putting 6 million Jews in gas chambers?
To be fair, U.S. military personnel wouldn't exactly say that they're just like the Nazis or anything like that, like Charlie's saying, but they do a lot of bad things.
I'm not trying to say they are like the Nazis.
Lost a lot of good people out there.
Yeah.
You know, they're fine people on both sides.
I'm just curious how, you know, we can hold the Nazis to their crimes, but if American soldiers commit crimes, it's not the whole military. There's bad apples in everything that you do. Okay. There are some people that are just mentally deranged. They've got some kind of personality disorder or whatever it is. And they end up committing crimes that they should be held accountable for. But rather than do that, we'd rather hold people who expose those crimes accountable, because the exposition of those crimes somehow endangered the lives of all the other people that weren't involved in those crimes. That makes total sense.
I would say it's the people who committed the crimes that endangered the lives of the other people, of the other troops that were out there. You know?
Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah. I'd also say it's the politicians who lied us into these wars in the first place that put those troops in danger in a time of war.
There should be no plea deals to avoid prison for anyone that endangers the security of our military or the national security of the United States. Ever.
It's always about national security. You know, it's a national security risk. They can do anything with that. Okay, thanks a lot, Mike Pence. Let's go on to number 6. We only got 2 more left.
Should the Surgeon General put out a warning of a health crisis, of endangering the troops?
Exposing war crimes?
Yes.
Yeah. It is a public health crisis, exposing war crimes, for sure. This just came down yesterday. The Supreme Court allows the White House to press social media companies to remove disinformation. This is something that went up to SCOTUS. Supreme Court on Wednesday said the White House and federal agencies such as the FBI may continue to urge social media platforms to take down content the government views as misinformation, handing the Biden administration a technical, if important, election year victory. Of immediate significance, the decision means that the Department of Homeland Security may continue to flag posts to social media companies such as Facebook and X that it believes may be the work of foreign agents seeking to disrupt this year's presidential race. Rather than delving into the weighty First Amendment questions, this sounds like it was written by ChatGPT. I don't know if you've seen the charts of the usage of the word delve. It skyrockets right after ChatGPT came out. It's
Really?
like one of its favorite words. Yeah. Rather than delving into the weighty First Amendment questions raised by the case, the court ruled that the state and social media users who challenged the Biden administration did not have standing. So that it was thrown out. This was not a decision based on the court case.
They couldn't prove that they were harmed, essentially.
Yeah, even though they could, because they were people who were harmed. Essentially, what I picked up was that since the people that were involved in the lawsuit were not named by name by the government in these emails, even though their accounts were taken down or they were censored, since they weren't specifically named by the government, then they didn't have standing personally. So as long as the government just does like a broad, anyone who says the word libertarian, and then we all get shut down, and then I say, hey, I said the word libertarian, the government shut me down. They're like, oh no, you don't have standing. They didn't name you by name.
Yeah. They didn't say specifically shut this person down.
That kind of thing. Justice Amy Coney Barrett wrote the opinion for the 6-3 majority, quote, to establish standing, the plaintiffs must demonstrate a substantial risk that in the near future they will suffer an injury that is traceable to a government defendant and redressable by the injunction they seek. Because no plaintiff has carried that burden, none has standing to seek a preliminary injunction. Biden administration officials have for years tried to persuade social media platforms to take down posts featuring misinformation about vaccines, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the 2020 election. They also have since pressed people to take down what they call malinformation, which is information that is true, but they don't like. Many of those posts, the government has said, ran afoul of the platform's own stated policies. Republican officials in 2 states, Missouri and Louisiana, and 5 social media users sued over that practice in 2022. Arguing that the White House did far more than persuade the tech giants to take down a few deceptive items. Instead, they said the Biden admin engaged in informal, backdoor campaign of coercion to silence voices it disagreed with, a practice known as jawboning. They're right about that. And it's annoying to me that this isn't just clearly seen by the Supreme Court for what it is. The government has the power to just take down your company if they want to do that. They can sue you into oblivion. They do antitrust lawsuits, threaten to break up your company. They can fine you, do whatever they want to do. And
if you don't comply
with what they want. And at the same time that all this was going on, you had congressional hearings where the people who run these companies were going up and getting, just yelled at by AOC and some of these people about some of the misinformation they were allowing when it came to the Russia hoax and stuff like that. And clearly, there was a threat, an implicit threat. In the case of the congressional hearings, there was an explicit threat, but there was a threat implied that the government could take action against them via antitrust, DOJ, stuff like that. It's really clear to me, and I wish it was more clear to them, but they threw it out because of standing. John Roberts, Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, Brett Kavanaugh, Ketanji Brown Jackson were the 6-3 majority. Justice Samuel Alito, joined by Thomas and Gorsuch, wrote a dissent that dubbed the case one of the most important free speech cases to reach this court in years. He said the challengers have brought forward enough evidence to establish standing. Quote, the court, however, shirks that duty and thus permits the successful campaign of coercion in this case to stand as an attractive model for future officials who want to control what people say, hear, and think. That is regrettable. From Alito. He called the conduct of those officials sued in the case unconstitutional, coercive, dangerous, insubordinate, and churlish. It was blatantly unconstitutional, and the country may come to regret the court's failure to say so. That's what Alito said. So anyway, a bunch of people.
This is kind of the cool thing about courts, is that, even though you can't argue to convince someone to move to your side, you can still write an opinion to be on the record. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So when people look back at the case law, they can be like, well, these three judges were, said we should have changed this thing.
And even the decision where they throw it out and they're not issuing like an official ruling on the case, this is just on standing. They still, I think Thomas had Alito or Thomas had a 35-page dissent about this whole thing. So yeah, they're on the record.
Now, it could be that the prosecution in this case could come back with a more tailored approach to have the court grant their standing to sue.
Yeah.
There are things that happen, and sometimes judges will give you hints, like basically, if you file an order to dismiss, I'm going to grant it, but you haven't. So we need these things followed.
The White House press secretary, KJP, praised the ruling. Her quote is, the Supreme Court's decision is the right one, and it helps ensure the Biden administration can continue our important work with technology companies to protect the safety and security of the American people after years of extreme and unfounded Republican attacks on public officials who engaged in critical work to keep Americans safe. All right, number 7, last one here. Biden officials pushed to remove age limits for trans surgery, documents show, and they were successful in doing this. So there's an organization called WPATH that's like one of the internationally recognized organizations of experts when it comes to transgenderism and all that. And a lot of these clinics, doctors in different places around the world, including the US, kind of go with their guidelines. And it's not exactly strict that they have to, but I've been doing a lot of research on this issue lately, reading every study I can possibly find about the trans stuff. And WPATH is mentioned multiple times in all these. Like they will basically link back to WPATH. Here's what their guidelines are. We're following their guidelines. We're going with what they say. Well, turns out WPATH was going to set age restrictions on trans, not just surgeries, but also hormone therapies, stuff like that. They're recommended. There's like 30,000 doctors that are part of, they were going to recommend age restrictions on this. The Biden administration found out about that, and they pressured them to not put in the age restrictions because it would be bad politically in the United States for them to do this. You want to read some?
By this gay person. What's their name? Levine?
Rachel Levine.
Clearly a dude. All right.
Yes.
Keep going.
Yes.
Health officials in the Biden administration pressed an international group of medical experts to remove age limits for adolescent surgeries from guidelines for care of transgender minors, according to newly unsealed court documents. Age minimums, officials feared, could fuel growing political opposition to such treatments. You don't say! Email excerpts from members of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health recount how staff for Admiral Rachel Levine, Assistant Secretary of Health at the Department of Health and Human Services, and herself a transgender woman, so a man, urged them to drop the proposed limits from the group's guidelines and apparently succeeded. The draft guidelines, released in late 2021, recommended setting the age minimums to 14 for hormonal treatments, 15 for mastectomies, 16 for breast augmentation or facial surgeries, and 17 for genital surgeries or hysterectomies.
Oh, that's too radical.
That is.
That's just radical. You're telling me they were going to recommend that no one under the age of 17 should get a genital surgery?
Yeah.
They've been taken over by right-wing fascists. If I've ever seen it, So they have these guidelines on here. They've established internationally accepted standards of care for the treatment of individuals with gender dysphoria. These internationally accepted guidelines are designed to promote the health and welfare of transgender, transsexual, and gender variant persons in cultural settings. Standards of care updated and revised as new scientific information becomes available, and this was approved in April of 2021. What they're talking about.
Yeah. The proposed age limits were eliminated in the final guidelines outlining standards of care, spurring concerns within the international group and with outside experts as to why the age proposals had vanished. One excerpt from an unnamed member of the WPATH guideline development group recalled a conversation with Sarah Boating, then serving as Admiral Levine's chief of staff. Quote, she is confident, based on the rhetoric she is hearing in D.C., and from what we have already seen, that these specific listings of ages under 18 will result in devastating legislation for trans care. She wonders if the specific ages can be taken out.
What it actually meant was people in the States and the U.S., when they were crafting some of these bans on surgeries and hormonal treatments for minors, would actually be able to point to the internationally recognized WPATH guidelines and those ages
that all countries have accepted.
And so for political reasons, the government decided to pressure them and keep them from putting those ages in their guidelines. So people that were doing these bans in these states would not be able to point to WPATH, who is an internationally accepted organization that a bunch of these healthcare experts around the country and around the world point to.
So in another email, Admiral Levine, I even hate that this person has this position.
I know. Like an admiral? You're telling me that this person has the same position as James T. Kirk? This is ridiculous.
Well, Adam Levine, Admiral Levine.
Not Adam Levine.
He was very concerned that having ages will affect access to care for trans youth and maybe adults too. Apparently, the situation in the USA is terrible, and he, and the Biden administration worried that having ages in the document will make matters worse. He asked us to remove them.
In other emails released this week, some WPATH members voiced their disagreement with the proposed changes. Quote, if our concern is with legislation, which I don't think it should be, we should be basing this on science and expert consensus if we're being ethical. Wouldn't including the ages be helpful? One member wrote, quote, I need someone to explain to me how taking out the ages will help in the fight against the conservative anti-trans agenda. What's crazy to me is that as libertarians, we've been thrown into this world of debating trans care for the youths because we now have a presidential candidate who's like, I don't want the government to be involved in this decision. I think it should be between the parents and their doctors, and that's who should make the decision. I'm no healthcare expert. Well, here's the problem. The doctors were going to set age restrictions on this because they thought it was the best thing to do, clearly, or they wouldn't have ever been doing it. They were going to do it. And then the government, who you don't want to be involved, came in and pressured them to take out those age restrictions. So is it really between the parents and the doctors? Because the doctors, the WPATH, which is what a lot of the doctors in the U.S. look towards, and the Academy of Pediatrics and all that, base their guidelines off of, they got pressure by the government to remove their age guidelines. So there's a problem here. That's what we got. All
right, y'all, go get your votes in. I also see, thank you to the live group for adding some additional voting options to which those votes are counting. They seem to be in running with what the dumb bleep of the week is, and I appreciate that. I mean, it looks like my ex is winning. But of the dumb bleeps that we covered on the show,
most people have gone for Chuck's ex.
Yeah.
Actually, you didn't even get any votes this time. They all went to your ex, just like the money.
Yeah, looks like it. It looks like infant mortality is going to win. I'm going to call it.
That's all we got this week for Liberty at Night on the Free Talk Live Network. I hope you enjoyed Dumpling for the Week and all the other conversations that we had this week. If you did and you want to hear more, go to Good Morning Liberty on your favorite podcast app or BernieLives.com in your browser. If not, we'll be back as Liberty at Night next Tuesday night. We'll see you then.
This hour of Free Talk Live is brought to you by Dash Digital Cash. Dash is the cryptocurrency designed to be used for spending. Rising fees have made Bitcoin useless for purchases, but Dash continues to have fees less than 1 cent per transaction, and its features ensure Dash is undefeated as the most useful cryptocurrency in the marketplace. From a technical standpoint, Dash transactions are irreversible, and its network is protected from 51% attacks by their Chainlocks technology. There's no need to wait for a confirmation before considering a Dash transaction complete, so it's great for merchants. Dash is one of the oldest